Chapter 408. The spring wind did not care about the wind and moon, nor did the summer wind. It was just the damp, clear, or stuffy air that carried on endlessly rubbing itself. However, the people in the air would give rise to appropriate emotions because of the rubbing of heaven and earth. So what if it's clear? Do you think the Qing emperor will believe your statement? Haitang was wearing a light green robe with 2 large pockets sewn on it. Her hands were in the pockets as usual. She looked at Fan Xian and spoke with a smile. Fan Xian tilted his head slightly. He knew what she meant. He wanted Eunuch Yao to send the scene in Jiangnan back to Jingdo and let everyone in court know that he had chosen the third prince. If it had been in the past, Fan Xian would certainly not have committed such a taboo by taking sides before the emperor made his choice. However, it was different now. The power in Fan Xian's hands was too great. He had to declare to the emperor that he had no interest in that chair. The problem was just as Haitang said. Why should the emperor believe him? Just based on the third prince? After the emperor passed away, if Fan Xian supported the third prince to take the throne, given the power in his hands and the background behind him, he could, at any time, make the third prince a mere figurehead, regent, or something like that. The emperor is healthy and in the prime of his life. Fan Xian lowered his head and quietly said. Fan Xian lowered his head and quietly said, the matters of the future are too far away. I can't always be a lonely official. Furthermore, he placed the third prince by my side, so I will follow his wishes. As for, what consequences will it cause? He narrowed his eyes and looked at the thin lake in front of him and the faint mist on the lake. In a quiet voice, he said, I've been thinking about a problem for a long time. Haitang yawned and covered her mouth. What problem? I also stood out this time because I wanted to put some pressure on the 2 brothers in the capital, Fan Xian said with a smile. The 2 brothers he spoke of were the crown prince and the second prince. I really want to force them to do something desperate. Otherwise, if they keep dragging their feet, who knows how tall my mother-in-law is? Is she as tall as a building? He shook his head. I just don't want to wait anymore. Haitang's heart jumped slightly. She turned her face to look at him. You really plan on laying your cards on the table? Fan Xian smiled and said, I haven't finished speaking. I want to force the 2 brothers to do something desperate, but what about His Majesty? He had the third prince follow me to Jiangnan, so he must have thought that the situation would develop like this in the future. The third prince was also involved, and his attitude was so ambiguous. How could the crown prince feel good? Now that the second prince can't go up or down, he can't just let it go like this. Could it be that our emperor also wants to force his own son to rebel? After clarifying his doubts, the chill in his heart eased a little, and he let out a sigh. Haitang lowered her head and said, even if the imperial clan is heartless, in the end, he is still a father. Is there a need to toy with his own son like this? Fan Xian nodded. That is also what I do not understand. Congratulations, Haitang suddenly said. Fan Xian asked in surprise, what is there to be happy about? Since your thoughts are so similar to your country's emperors, then in the coming year, naturally, you will win, Haitang said softly. Fan Xian thought for a moment and then quietly said, it looks like you have more confidence in my emperor than I do in him. Because you are a southerner, Haitang said indifferently. Because after you entered the capital, the Qing emperor has always appeared somewhat quiet, so you have not experienced his terror. When he was still the crown prince, he led 3 expeditions to the north. With a remote Qing kingdom, he split the mighty Wei kingdom into pieces and beat all the other countries under heaven until they were as silent as cicadas in winter. Such methods, such terror, if I stand in your position and think about it, naturally, I have great confidence in him. The ruler of your country is a great ruler, Haitang very directly praised the foreign emperor. Haitang directly praised the foreign emperor. In these 2 years, the lion hasn't been sleeping. He's just narrowing his eyes to digest the food in his stomach. However, if someone really dares to try and touch his position, his eyes will open and he will mercilessly tear the enemy into countless pieces. Fan Xian fell silent. Actually, I understand. That is why I want to do this matter, not him. When all is said and done, you are still a passionate person. Haitang gazed at him with a not quite there smile. Although you often like to hide your benevolence under the guise of selfishness, you are still a passionate person. If the Qing Emperor finally acts in a rage, blood will flow like rivers. You do not want to see this situation, so you want to do it yourself, to suppress the destructive power of this matter to the minimum. Fan Xian lowered his head, tacitly agreeing with this statement. No matter how much hatred he had with the eldest princess of Xinyang, the crown prince, and the second prince, the eldest princess was, after all, Wan Er's birth mother. That lovely Yi Ling had also become the second princess. Once the battle over the throne erupted, it would certainly bring disaster to the family. Fan Xian was a cold and emotionless person in many ways, but he did not want thousands of heads to hang on the walls of Jingdou and dirty blood to wet the walls. The second prince, who was very similar to him, smiled so shyly. Could he still smile like that after becoming a human head? If the emperor and he won, what would happen to the Yi family? What would happen to Yi Ling? For Fan Xian, this was a problem. For the emperor, this was not a problem. Thus, Fan Xian strongly hoped to be able to take the initiative in solving this problem, but, Haitang quietly said, you should also understand that you alone cannot solve this problem. Your enemies still have many powers that are beyond what you can handle. Against those people, the Qing Emperor has his own plans. He does not need you to do it for him. In the end, you are only the sharpest sword in his hand, and he is the hand holding the sword. Fan Xian knew she was talking about the Juanshan conference and nodded silently. There is also the Empress Dowager, Haitang said with a slight smile. Fan Xian found a glimmer of sadness in the smile in her eyes. He couldn't resist muttering, both empresses are very troublesome. It was clear that Haitang did not want to continue this unsolvable topic. Her gaze, intentionally or not, landed on the ancient sword at his waist. Wang Qinian sent it. Fan Xian met her gaze and explained. I heard it was the sword of the last Wei Emperor. Haitang's expression did not change. It was as if she had long known the origins of this sword. In a clear and cold voice, she said, be careful not to arouse too much discussion. Fan Xian smiled. Thank you for the reminder. I had originally thought that not many people would recognize it. Haitang lowered her head. No one knew what she was thinking. A moment later, she faintly said, it has only been 30 years since the destruction of the Wei kingdom. Although Xiao En and Zhuang Mohan, the last spiritual symbols of the Wei kingdom, have already passed away, it has not been that long. In this world, there are many people who remember the events of that time. Fan Xian didn't know why the girl was acting so strangely. An absurd feeling welled up in his heart. Presently, the world could be said to be peaceful, and everywhere could be said to be prosperous. Who would have thought that just 20 years ago, the world was still a large battlefield? At that time, there were endless battles. Countless people died. One large country was destroyed, and two large countries were born. Blood flowed on the green hills, and the yellow waves piled up corpses. Among the hundreds of thousands of white bones, the important figures who now led the way of the world were born. The two of them fell silent and stared at the show lake in front of them in a daze. This show lake was not the show lake of Baoyue brothel in Jingdou. It was the lake behind Baoyue brothel in Suzhou. Last month, Fan Xizha had sent a letter to the people in Jiangnan to start digging the lake. He had used a number of laborers and forcefully doubled the size of the show lake. Now, if one looked back from Baoyue brothel, the scenery was even more beautiful than it was then. However, Baoyue brothel had been cut in half by that strike. At this time, they were still busy repairing it. Thus, Fan Xian and Hai Tang could only stand coldly by the lake and watch the mist on the surface of the lake gather and disperse, and gather again. It was as impermanent as life and the world. Your brothel is repairing very slowly. Hai Tang seemed to have inadvertently mentioned this. I'm embarrassed to use your northern Qi silver in front of you. It's too much. Fan Xian smiled and immediately explained, there's no rush to repair the building. I've brought over some professionals from the capital to carefully examine the sword marks in the building. The so-called professionals were the people from the second and third bureaus. Presently, the broken Baoyue brothel was Yi Liuyan's first crime scene. Fan Xian hoped to be able to dig out some of the great grandmaster's true methods of attack from the sword marks and aura for future use. Hai Tang said, I've gone to see. Oh. Fan Xian's eyes lit up. He knew that this girl's insight and knowledge of martial arts were much higher than his. He thought that she must have discovered something. The 8 pillars were cut down at the same time. Hai Tang recalled the fine marks in the building and couldn't resist sighing. The other cracks were only caused by sword intent. If you and I wanted to cut down the pillars, we could barely do it, but that kind of control over power, who knows how many years and months it would take to reach that kind of realm? Fan Xian lowered his head and said, in your opinion, for such a heaven-shaking strike, how many times can Yi Liuyan strike out? 3, Hai Tang said straightforwardly. This is under normal circumstances. If that old man put his life on the line, no one knows what kind of miracle would happen. It was indeed a miracle. For a human to be able to demonstrate a method like the might of heaven and earth. You're really not coming with me? Fan Xian faced the surface of the lake and let out a deep breath. There has to be someone left in Suzhou, Hai Tang said with a slight smile. Besides, you shamelessly had the 8th Bureau publicize our private affairs. If we really went to Hangzhou, what would I do? Even if you're a shameless person, you have to understand me a little. It was a straightforward hidden bitterness. Although she said it with a smile, it was impossible for Fan Xian to resist. He smiled slightly and said, then I'm leaving. Hai Tang bowed slightly and said in a quiet voice, I won't see you out. In the early morning in Suzhou, the wind and fog above the lake welcomed the sunlight and quickly dispersed. The young man and woman did not say another word. They naturally parted and walked along the lakeside in different directions. It did not take long to leave Suzhou. Fan Xian had originally prepared to live by West Lake in Hangzhou while he was in Jiangnan. However, because the Ming family matter was unexpectedly thorny and there were many more unexpected stories, he had stayed until now. Knowing that he was going to move to Hangzhou, his subordinates had long prepared everything. Even the girls in Hua Garden, under Cici's lead, had made preparations to move. Fan Xian did not return Hua Garden to the salt merchant. After all, Hai Tang still had to stay in Suzhou and keep an eye on the large amounts of silver in the Palace Treasury Transport Company and Zhaoshang Money House. Thus, he had to give the girl a place to live. He had also carefully left behind a few average-looking but efficient serving girls. Naturally, young Jimei would not feel heartache for this garden. On the contrary, she was extremely happy. At the farewell banquet, Yang Jimei eagerly sat at the lower end of the table. She didn't hear what the 2 high-ranking officials were saying. She only felt that her ancestors' graves were emitting green smoke. She was actually able to eat at the same table as the imperial envoy. The meal did not take long. The Jiangnan governor, Xue Qing, the rarely seen inspector, the Suzhou Zhizhou who was currently being investigated by the Overwatch Council, and these officials all came to see Fan Xian off. However, because of the vicious situation in the bamboo shed that day with the dragon raising its head, none of the Jiangnan officials, big or small, dared to give any gifts. However, Xue Qing did not avoid preparing expensive gifts. The weight of the gift list made Fan Xian involuntarily speechless. After the banquet, Fan Xian and Xue Qing walked casually in the garden. Fan Xian smiled and said, "Sir, you spoil me like this. First, I can't afford it. Second, how can I properly lecture these Jiangnan road officials in the future?" His words carried a double meaning. Xue Qing laughingly scolded, "It's not like it's for you. You have to take it even if you don't want to." Fan Xian was puzzled. Xue Qing said in a clear voice, "Half of it is for the young lady of the Lin family. No, it should be Lady Fan. It's her first time in Hangzhou, so she certainly didn't bring enough things with her. This is for her." He continued, "The other half is for my teacher. I have been busy with official business in Suzhou and have been unable to go personally to express my filial piety. I hope Sir Fan Jr. will help me bring this gift." Fan Xian smiled. A few days ago, he had already informed Xue Qing of his upcoming trip to Wuzhou and had written it in a letter to the emperor. Only now did he remember that no matter what, Xue Qing had to prepare a heavy gift. Having thought this through, he didn't say anything more. In a quiet voice, Fan Xian said, "I will be in Hangzhou. If you have any orders, please send a letter." "I wouldn't dare," Xue Qing smiled and said. "You are also the imperial envoy. I wouldn't dare to give orders, but there will always be trouble." Fan Xian casually replied. He knew that Xue Qing had long hoped for him to leave Suzhou, so he didn't point it out. Just as they were about to part, Xue Qing suddenly opened his mouth and asked, "Sir Fan Jr., there is one thing I have not found the answer to." "Sir, please speak," Fan Xian said seriously. Xue Qing was silent for a moment and then said, "Sir, just how old are you this year?" Given his status as the Jiangnan governor, he didn't use conventional greetings. Instead, he used the tone of an elder to ask. Fan Xian chuckled and said, 19. Xue Qing paused slightly. On the contrary, it was the truth of the rumors that he didn't dare believe. He couldn't resist shaking his head and smiling bitterly. Indeed, heroes come from the youth. After the imperial envoy left the city, Hua Garden immediately became much quieter. Suzhou, which had long been under the powerful pressure of the Overwatch Council and Fan Xian, seemed to come alive in a day. After confirming that the black carriages from the Fan Manor had left the city gates, the people of Suzhou began to spread the news. Hot tears filled their eyes. The treacherous official had finally left. Some people even began to set off firecrackers. That night, the officials of Jiangnan Road, particularly the Suzhou government, also began to celebrate. They congratulated each other for not having been invited by the Overwatch Council to drink tea. As for the officials who had already fallen, no one gave them another glance. Although Suzhou and Hangzhou were not far apart, it was impossible for Fan Xian to hear the firecrackers of the Suzhou people sending off the plague. Later, although the secret agents of the Overwatch Council had reported it, he had only dismissed it with a laugh. The group of people stayed in the Peng family manor by West Lake in Hangzhou and returned to the time when they first arrived in Jiangnan. Fan Xian's butt hadn't even touched the ground when he asked, "Where is the madam?" A subordinate reported, "There seems to be some obstruction. There's also Xiaozhou." Fan Xian was slightly startled. A wave of unease rose in his heart. After thinking for a moment, he didn't say anything more. Leading the 7 tiger guards, he rode toward Xiaozhou. Dusk arrived in Xiaozhou. Because Fan Xian was worried about Wanner, he gave up his usual carriage and rode directly. When he entered Xiaozhou, he felt as if his entire body was falling apart. The faces of the subordinates and tiger guards behind him were deathly pale. They had almost collapsed from exhaustion on this day's journey. A dozen fine horses broke through the silence of the night in Xiaozhou and came directly to a manor. This manor had once been Jiangnan Shui Han's branch in Xiaozhou. Now, it had long been taken over by the Overwatch Council. After some repairs, it had become Fan Xian's private residence in name. Fan Xian flipped off his horse. Ignoring the greetings of his subordinates at the door, he directly charged into the courtyard. Just as he was about to enter the stone steps into the inner residence, he saw a familiar person. It was the wife of the Teng family. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and asked, "What is it, young master?" A glimmer of joy flashed through the eyes of the wife of the Teng family. "Why are you here? The mistress is fine. She is just resting in the room." Fan Xian didn't believe her. Logically speaking, Wanner should have arrived in Hangzhou today. She had probably been delayed because something had happened to her body. He hurriedly pushed open the door and entered. Like a gust of wind, he swept to the side of the bed. With a flip of his hand, the wind pushed the door shut tightly. He gazed at the girl lying on the bed and the thread of exhaustion on that familiar and beautiful face. He couldn't resist feeling heartache and said, "Your body isn't good, so walk slower." Lin Wanner gazed at him with a smile and said, "Walk slower, so you'll have more time to be happy?" Fan Xian smiled and said, "Where did you get all these witty words from?" As he spoke, his finger had already gently rested on his wife's jade-white wrist and began to feel her pulse. What Fan Xian was most worried about was Wanner's body. After all, she had been infected with a lung disease for a number of years. Although he had carefully taken care of her these 2 years and had the medicine teacher Fei Jia personally made, Wanner's body was still weak. He was afraid she wouldn't be able to stand the cold on the road. His finger gently rested on Wanner's wrist. Fan Xian's expression gradually became serious, particularly the feeling of his hand. It made his heart jump slightly. How had Wanner become so thin? "You stopped taking the medicine?" Feeling the abnormality of the pulse, Fan Xian pulled back his finger like he had been electrocuted. He gazed at his wife in shock. His eyes were filled with concern and confusion. Lin Wanner slowly pulled back her hand and gently coughed. She gazed at Fan Xian and spoke calmly with a glimmer of determination and joy. "Yes, I stopped taking the medicine." Before Ruoruo left, she brought Master Ku He to the manor to sit for a while. Master Ku He said that Sir Fei's medicine was too powerful. If Wanner wanted to have children, she had to stop taking the medicine. To be continued. If you want to know what happened after, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 409. Hearing Wan Er's words, Fan Xian's face immediately darkened. He immediately remembered that his wife's body was not well. He quickly put on a warm smile and said, "What are you thinking about?" "Sir Fei is my teacher. He has seen me grow up. When we were married, that medicine was a good medicine that my teacher had painstakingly fished out of Dongyi. How could he not understand the principle of being a tyrant? During this year, you've been taking that medicine. Your body is clearly getting better. You can't stop, you silly girl." Lin Wan smiled slightly. There was a glimmer of tiredness in her smile. In a quiet voice, she said, "Naturally, Sir Fei's medicine is good, but, what Master Ku He said," without waiting for his wife to finish, Fan Xian had already said firmly, "Of course, Master Ku He is at the top of the world when it comes to fighting and discussing. But, when it comes to treating illnesses and taking medicine, he can't even compare to a finger of my teacher and I listen to him? It's better to listen to a sow." Although he was restraining himself, Wan still heard the anger in the depths of his words. Gently pulling on his hand, she comfortingly said, "Don't be angry. Although I've stopped taking the medicine, the imperial doctor has come to see me. He said that my old illness has healed. It is just that the qi in my body has been rushing recently, so my body is a bit weak." Fan Xian shook his head and half sat on the bed. Pulling Wan into his embrace, he gently patted her shoulder and said, "Your body is the most important. Don't listen to what other people say." Wan leaned into his embrace and was silent for a moment. Slowly, she said, "But I really want to have a child." Fan Xian was silent. No one knew what he was thinking. A moment later, he said, I don't want to be angry at you, but I want you to know that there is nothing to discuss in this matter. As long as your body is good, what does it matter if you have a child or not? In the present world, not having an heir was considered a great sin. Wan and Fan Xian had been married for a year and a half, yet there was still no movement in her stomach. This girl always remembered this matter and felt very sad. Hearing Fan Xian's powerful and resonant words at this moment, she couldn't help but be startled for a moment. Wan Er's emotions were very complicated. She seemed to be happy, but there was also a faint sadness mixed with a bit of embarrassment. Fan Xian looked at his wife's sad expression in his arms and couldn't help but sigh. He stretched out his finger and gently rubbed between her brows. In a quiet voice, he said, in this world, there are many idiots who think that not being able to have children is a woman's problem. Actually, let me tell you, whether or not you can have children is a matter between husband and wife. I think it is very likely that I have some kind of disease. What does that have to do with you? This was a joke meant to comfort Wanner, but Wanner was dumbfounded. She thought that her husband was really thick-skinned, to be able to say that word. She had no idea what he was talking about, but she vaguely understood that he was trying to put the blame on her. She couldn't help but roll her eyes. What nonsense are you talking about? What does it have to do with a man whether or not I can have children? Fan Xian laughed and said, who said it doesn't matter? Why don't you try asking old Yao and old Dai in the palace to give birth to 2 children? Lin Wanner was startled again. Fan Xian continued to smile and said, even the incomparably profound eunuch Hong wouldn't be able to have a child if you asked him to. So, having children is a matter between a man and a woman. Lin Wanner immediately came back to her senses. A blush appeared on her cheeks. She spat and said, the more you talk, the more ridiculous it is. Fan Xian stopped laughing and said seriously, then let's talk about serious things. You have to insist on taking the medicine. Lin Wanner listened and made a sound of acknowledgement, but her eyes flashed. Fan Xian lowered his head to look and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He knew he would not be able to convince her. Wanner, this girl, was usually a simple and cheerful person. Inside, she was exceptionally intelligent. However, when it came to important matters that involved her and Fan Xian, she was particularly stubborn. The scientific reasoning that Fan Xian spoke of was probably something that even someone as unconventional as Hai Tang would not believe. Naturally, Wanner was the same. Why must we have children? Fan Xian tenderly held his wife and quietly said, look at your childhood life in the palace. Think of how I was exiled to Danzhou as a child. You will know that after we have children, we still have to raise them. If we can't raise them well, we might as well not have had them in the beginning. Lin Wanner lowered her head and pressed her lips together. Very calmly and confidently, she objected, we are not them. We can raise children well. Fan Xian felt a glimmer of helplessness. But, if it really can't be born because of me, then it's better not to have children. It's not as important as your body. Although Lin Wanner felt warm, she still stubbornly shook her head. I just want a child. Fan Xian felt a headache coming on and said, always so stubborn. Lin Wanner raised her head to look at him. Her long eyelashes gently blinked. I want to have a child with you. This year, you've been either in northern Qi or Jiangnan. I've been very lonely, although it was only a part of the reason, it still made Fan Xian feel a deep sense of guilt. He didn't know what to say. The two of them hugged each other quietly. Perhaps it was because she was aroused by the body heat, Wanner began to cough gently again. She didn't want Fan Xian to worry, so she forcefully suppressed it. Her little face was bright red and appeared very pitiful. Fan Xian's heart ached. He gently rubbed her chest and comfortingly said, don't think so much. After we get to Hangzhou, I'll help you take good care of yourself. As for Sir Fei's medicine, I'll analyze it in detail. No matter what, you can't stop. Lin Wan'er raised her head and gazed at him pitifully like a kitten. Fan Xian's face darkened and pretended to be fierce. This matter is not up for discussion. Lin Wan'er pouted her full lips and rubbed her head against his chest unwillingly. Fan Xian sighed and began to massage her to relax her mind. His fingers moved around and sent in threads of pure Tianyi Dao Zhenqi. Wan'er felt her body warm up and her mind gradually become clear. After a long and arduous journey, the exhaustion in her body grew stronger. Just like that, she peacefully leaned against his body and fell asleep. Fan Xian walked out of the bedroom and stretched, relaxing his stiff limbs. The wife of the Teng family came up to greet him and told him what had happened along the way. As Fan Xian listened, he nodded his head. It looked like after leaving Jingdo and not under his father's watch, Wan'er had stopped taking the medicine. This action could be said to be brave, but it could also be said to be reckless. However, Fan Xian could not feel any anger. Although, in the depths of his heart, he still thought that Wan'er should love herself the most, in the end, it was for the matter of the child. How could he bear to make Wan'er sad? He ordered the wife of the Teng family to prepare the commonly used medicine. The wife of the Teng family said awkwardly, "If the mistress doesn't want to take it, what should we do?" Fan Xian lowered his head and thought for a moment. "When it's ready, tell me. I'll go feed her." Joy surged onto the wife of the Teng family's face. She praised the heavens a few times and happily left. Arriving at the front hall, Deng Ziyu, who he had sent to the west of Shazhou to pick up Wan'er, bowed and greeted him. He also told him what had happened along the way. Presently, the Jiangnan water bandits were well behaved. There was also the Jiangnan Navy stationed in Shazhou, so Wan'er and her group went down the river without encountering any problems. Fan Xian nodded and sat in the chair. Suddenly, he sighed. A faint worry rose to his face. Deng Ziyu paused slightly. He thought to himself, even when his superior was facing the second prince in Jingdo or killing people in the night in Jiangnan, he had never revealed such a serious expression. What was going on? He guessed in his heart that the battle for the first wife in the Fan manor had already begun. He couldn't help but lower his head in fear and keep quiet, not saying a word. Fan Xian had no idea what he was thinking in his heart. He was only thinking back to what Wan'er had said earlier. Sir Fei's medicine really had such serious side effects. From Danzhou to Jingdo, before they were married, before he met Wan'er in the Qing temple, Fan Xian knew that his wife had been infected with tuberculosis. In today's world, this illness was basically an incurable disease. However, when a young man and woman met, they always had incomparable courage to welcome the future disaster. At the time, he had only forcefully suppressed the faint fear. Fortunately, there was Sir Fei. On the night of the wedding, Sir Fei had hurried back from Dongyi with great difficulty and brought back the strange medicine that specialized in treating tuberculosis. The medicine was called ice smoke. This medicine took a full 4 years of Sir Fei's time. 4 years before the wedding, there were already rumors of a marriage between the Fan and Lin families in the palace. After using so much energy and time, the strange medicine was indeed effective. After the wedding, Wan'er persisted in taking it. Each time, she only scraped a small amount from the pill and swallowed it with a medicinal soup. Her body gradually improved and she no longer coughed. The imperial physicians in the palace all thought that the princess' tuberculosis had already been miraculously cured. But, side effects? Vinegar made turtle shell. Fan Xian thought back to the ingredients in the pill. Rehmannia, donkey's gelatin, beeswax, what does this have to do with making a child? He immediately thought of Fei Jie's expression when he spoke on the night of the wedding. After taking the medicine, you are forbidden from sexual intercourse for a month. Naturally, this was a naughty joke. Now that Fan Xian thought back, he realized that his teacher seemed to have hidden some important information. Later, Fan Xian had always felt it was strange why Sir Fei rarely saw him. It was as if he was hiding from something. Could it be, the true side effect of this iced smoke was to harm the patient's reproductive function? Fan Xian sat in the chair and couldn't help but shake his head. As long as Wanner's illness could be cured, as long as her tuberculosis did not come back, as long as she was healthy, was it important whether or not she could make a child? Speaking of his previous life, Fan Xian felt that the most inexplicable scene in that world was the one he would occasionally see on television or in novels. The doctor in the delivery room, full of caution, came out of the delivery room and told the family of the pregnant woman that she had a difficult labor and could only save one. Should they save the adult or the child? Save the adult or the child? Was there a need to ask? Fan Xian had always thought this was the stupidest question. It was absolutely stupidest to the extreme. Fan Xian was not an idiot. But, old bald donkey. Fan Xian stared coldly at the stone floor in front of him. The evil fire in his eyes burned brightly. Sinisterly, he said, "You big idiot." Deng Ziyu paused. He didn't understand the word idiot, but it was clear that the commissioner was already angry to the point of exploding. He quickly comforted, "Sir, don't be angry, don't be angry." Fan Xian opened his mouth and cursed loudly, "Calm my *ss." He slammed his palm down and directly smashed the table beside him into pieces. He cursed sinisterly, "That goddamn old bald donkey, what exactly are his intentions?" Regardless of whether or not Sir Fei's medicine had side effects, it was truly and greatly beneficial to Wanner's body. After Wanner stopped taking the medicine, her body clearly weakened. Who knew what would happen in the future? Wanner stopped taking the medicine because Ku He had pointed out this matter, but why would Ku He do this? Fan Xian did not think that Ku He was a person who purely bemoaned the state of the universe and pitted the fate of mankind. Whether or not his wife could have a child, he believed that he would not be so attentive. Thinking of how Wanner almost had a relapse of her old illness because of Ku He's words, Fan Xian's fingers began to tremble. He became angry and found it difficult to suppress the urge to kill. He stood up. His eyes burned with a sinister fire. Staring at Deng Ziyu, he said, "Send an order to Su Wenmao and Xia Qifei. This year, all goods going north, lower their grade by 1." Deng Ziyu made a sound, thinking, what exactly had happened? Both sides of the trade with northern Qi had been very happy. Suddenly making a scene like this seemed to hurt the overall situation. He couldn't resist trying to persuade, "Sir, although I don't know what happened, lowering a grade is the same as northern Qi losing hundreds of thousands of liang of silver, this is too big of a matter." Fan Xian knew that Deng Ziyu was urging him not to harm the public discussion because of a personal grudge. He smiled coldly and said, "I am a person who returns grievances with grievances. Others want to make my family unhappy, so I will make their country unhappy. Hundreds of thousands of liang of silver in exchange for my wife's coughing for a dozen days is already letting them off easy." Deng Ziyu heard the coldness in Fan Xian's tone and didn't dare to say anything more. Carefully, he asked, "What exactly happened?" Fan Xian did not reply. "Sir, the bald donkey you speak of, what donkey is it?" Fan Xian smiled coldly and said, "It's northern Qi's Ku He, that hairless donkey." Deng Ziyu was silent. He was shocked but didn't dare say anything. He thought to himself that the commissioner dared to curse Sigurjian out in the street, perhaps it wasn't Sigurjian? At this time, calling Ku He an old donkey in his own home didn't seem to be a big deal. Fan Xian continued coldly and said, "Send a letter to Wang Qinian. Tell him to prepare to release the news." "Yes." Deng Ziyu accepted the order and asked, "What specifications?" "When?" "Specifications?" Fan Xian narrowed his eyes. "Within 3 days, let everyone in northern Qi know a story. Also, let them believe this story. As for when, listen to my instructions." Yes. If it wasn't for the fact that Ruoruo was currently studying under Ku He, Fan Xian wished he could spread the news of Ku He eating human flesh today. Although he knew that this kind of rumor would not harm Ku He's majestic reputation and would not bring him any real benefits. In other words, now was not the best time to spread the news. However, Fan Xian couldn't help it. Now that he couldn't kill Ku He had to do something to get revenge. Many times, Fan Xian appeared to be a calm and sinister person, but when it came to the people he cared about the most, he would become angry like a lion. Even though he knew he wouldn't get much and would suffer a loss, he still had to roar and protect his territory. Regardless of what Ku He thought, Wan had indeed stopped taking medicine because of his words, so Fan Xian had to make Northern Qi and Ku He suffer a loss. Perhaps it was a bit childish. But Fan Xian could still be called a person, probably because of this childishness. Tomorrow morning, I'll take a boat back to my hometown. I'm officially taking a leave of 10 days. I'll be back around the 9th day of the Lunar New Year. If I can write in my hometown, I'll write some. If I can't, I'll seriously entertain myself and celebrate the new year. Here, I wish my dear brothers and sisters a happy new year. I have to go and pack my luggage now. Well, there's still one more chapter left in the 5th volume. After I finish the next chapter, I'll write a summary at the end of the volume. I'll also write a summary of 2007. I'll recall my life last year and the days I read and wrote with everyone. I'll also wish everyone a happy new year, good health, and a happy family. Oh, right, if everyone is afraid of not having a book to read, I'll introduce everyone to Jingguan's new book, Unparalleled Food and Lust. This is something I really, really like. Of course, Jingguan's book doesn't need me to advertise it, but I know some friends might have been scared away by the first 3 chapters and the introduction. This book is written very comfortably. Personally, I think it's much better than The Beast's Blood. At least, the opening chapter is much better. I can't give a detailed evaluation. I can only say that Jingguan is very talented. Of course, I don't know him, so this is not an advertisement. I just want to share something good with everyone. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 410. It was a very fulfilling and tiring New Year's Day. I'm going to catch up on my sleep later. I'll start work tomorrow. I'll report the details of the sublimation to everyone the next day. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author and support the original reading. Chapter 411. The big tree in the Shazhou side manor was unlucky. Fan Xian had used the emperor's sword to unleash his kingly aura and shaved off countless tree bark. The reason for this was all because the young imperial envoy's anger was not shallow. He could not put on a sour face in front of his wife, nor could he immediately rush to Shangjing in northern Qi to scold his own sister's teacher. Thus, he had to find a way to vent his anger. Fan Xian was not a boring boss who liked to beat and scold his subordinates to relieve stress. It just so happened that in his previous life, he had been lying in bed reading a book. He had once read a sour story that made him cry. Thus, in this life, he learned from the male lead of that story. The male lead, who liked to pour water that he washed his feet, had been bullied by his wife and endured it for many years. He would always sneak out in the middle of the night and smash trees by the river to find a pitiful psychological balance. Fan Xian didn't smash trees. He used the Grand Sigu sword to slice at trees. As he sliced, he gritted his teeth hatefully. When the trees in the courtyard had their hair all white overnight and their clothes torn to shreds, revealing their lowly and naked bodies, Fan Xian and his group left in the carriage and returned to the Peng Manor by West Lake. There were many people waiting for the imperial envoy and the princess by West Lake. It was not convenient for the two governors in Suzhou to come personally, but the Hangzhou Zhizhou that Fan Xian secretly admired would not be polite. He sealed off a third of the long embankment by West Lake to make it easier for the Fan Manor's carriages to enter. He also led a group of subordinates to wait around, afraid that these two important figures would be dissatisfied. As for this flattery, Fan Xian comfortably accepted it. After all, Wanner's health was not good and she did need peace and quiet. After everyone met up in the manor, Cici and the wives of the Teng family served Wanner to rest. Fan Xian found some time to see the Hangzhou Zhizhou and said a few warm words of encouragement. The next day, he had Tiger Guard Gao De block all of the wives of these officials outside the back garden. The mistress of the Fan family did not see guests. Wanner gazed at Fan Xian pitifully. Her brows had long furrowed into a weak willow leaf in the wind. Her eyes were crying and complaining. "Good husband, just spare me." Fan Xian smiled and said, "Be good, just drink the medicine. Otherwise, I'll spank you." Wanner had no choice but to drink the medicine bitterly. She couldn't help but sigh deep in her heart. She wondered why she was so stupid. She told Fan Xian the reason. Given his personality, he would not allow her to do this. If she had known earlier, she would not have come to Jiangnan. She would have just secretly stopped the medicine in Jingdou. Suddenly, she shyly thought that if she didn't go to Jiangnan, even if she stopped taking the medicine and got rid of the foreign element in her body, but, without him, how could she have a child? Fan Xian was wiping away the medicine at the corner of her mouth with a handkerchief when he suddenly saw his wife's blushing face. He was startled, not knowing what she was thinking. "Wife," he teased, "why are you so shy?" Wanner rolled her eyes at him and said, "I'm not telling you." She quickly changed the topic. Coming to Jiangnan this time, for one, was a matter that had been decided before the new year. Another was an important matter that needed to be discussed with Fan Xian. For these matters, she could not trust the servants to pass on the message. Fan Xian saw that she was serious and furrowed his brows slightly. Putting his ear close, he listened to his wife speak quietly by his ear. His mood grew heavier and heavier, but his face did not change. It remained calm. He comforted and said, "I thought it was something big for you to come down to Jiangnan in such a hurry. The elders in the palace are used to gossiping about people and don't care too much." During their days in Jingdou, this young couple had a good understanding. Furthermore, they had once made it clear that Wanner was now someone's wife and daughter. In such a complicated relationship, Fan Xian pitied her and did not want her to be too involved in these dark matters, even if Wanner could actually help him a lot. For example, on the day the great prince visited Fan Manor, the two of them spoke in the middle of the night. Although she said this, Wanner could not pretend that nothing had happened around her. Furthermore, she could not blindfold her eyes and pretend that she did not see her husband and her mother, who she was not very close to, at daggers drawn. A girl's thoughts were difficult to guess. In this matter, she always wanted to find a way to protect Fan Xian and not let both sides sink into an irreparable situation. However, it was very difficult. It was difficult for Fan Xian to understand, and it was the same for Wanner. Thus, she could only stay in Jingdou and carefully ask around for news from the Fourth Bureau. She helped Fan Xian analyze the mysteries of those women's politics. Using her aloof status and the privilege of entering and leaving the palace as she pleased, she helped Fan Xian, who was far away in Jiangnan, contact the people in the palace and eliminate any resistance that could be eliminated. Fan Xian knew about these things and knew that he could not stop her, so he could only let her be. Furthermore, there were times when he needed Wanner to act as a lubricant in the middle, just like the trip to the palace after the spring examination. Because of Fan Xian's opposition, Wan'er's abilities were not fully displayed. Her natural sense of politics and palace matters was suppressed. However, this did not mean that she did not understand these things. Thus, after she learned of the story in the palace, she resolutely came to Jiangnan. Different from what everyone thought, the young mistress of the Fan Manor did not come to Jiangnan to see the northern Qi saint girl called Duo Duo. She just wanted to remind Fan Xian of certain things in person. The elders in the palace can influence a lot. Wan'er looked at Fan Xian worriedly and said in a quiet voice, "The Empress Dowager is the Empress aunt. The relationship between these two cannot be separated. The Empress has arranged for someone to enter the palace to tell the Empress Dowager the story of the stone. There are dangers hidden within. You cannot be too careless." Fan Xian fell silent. A glimmer of anger welled up in his heart. When he was copying Story of the Stone in Danzhou, it was only to find some games for himself and Cici and for Ruoruo to entertain. At the same time, it was to satisfy his literary thoughts. He did not think too much of it. Although he knew that old Chao's writings at the time were somewhat taboo, he thought that this was a completely different country and two different worlds. How could it be taboo? So he had been careless. No one had thought that their life and their encounters would later change so much. Every word and sentence in Dream of the Red Chamber seemed to express their dissatisfaction and hidden bitterness. Particularly that poem about Sister Qiao. Anyone could write this book, but it could not be him. Yet, in the present world, everyone believed that he had written this book. The resentment in the book seemed to be narrating his dissatisfaction with the matter of the old Yi family. The Empress had arranged for someone to enter the palace to tell the old Empress Dowager the story. Given the Empress Dowager's sensitive and suspicious mind, would she not think that he had ulterior motives? The matters of the royal family were all about the heart. If the heart was suspicious, then the person was suspicious. If the heart could be punished, then the person could be punished. Fan Xian thought quietly for a while and found that this was indeed a problem he was about to face. If the Empress Dowager truly thought that he had dissatisfaction in his heart and wanted to redress the matter of the past, then perhaps the old woman's temporary silence would no longer exist. Presently, the Qing kingdom was governed by filial piety. Whatever the Empress Dowager said, his emperor would have to express it. However, this was not a big problem. Fan Xian had been in Jiangnan for a long time, and his strength had reached a certain level. These small waves would not make him very afraid. He gently patted his wife's hand and warmly said, "Don't worry, even if that old woman suspects me, so what? I haven't done anything. She can't just ask the emperor to strip me of my position." Wan'er laughed bitterly and couldn't resist shaking her head. Using her finger, she gently poked at the spot between his brows and said, "That is my grandmother, and also your grandmother. Why are you calling her old woman?" Fan Xian chuckled and said, "Speaking of which, when I saw you in the Qing temple, I would never have guessed that you would be my cousin." "Humph. I don't know who hid it from me for so long," Lin Wan'er muttered with a pout. Without waiting for Fan Xian to comfort her, Wan'er continued with a serious expression, "Even if there is no harm in this matter for now, what about the matter of the Ming family? The storm of your lawsuit in Jiangnan has long spread into Jingdou. Presently, Song Shuren can be considered to have truly made a name for himself. To say that the eldest legitimate son does not have a natural right to inheritance, this touches the bottom line of many people. Although Song Shuren is helping Xia Qifei fight the lawsuit, everyone in Jingdou knows that you are their true backer. They can't help but ask in their hearts, just what is our Sir Fan Jr. thinking?" Fan Xian raised his eyebrows and said, "What can I think?" Lin Wan'er gazed at him and said, "As for looking at it on the surface, you want to help Xia Qifei take back the Ming family property. Would the Empress Dowager not suspect you? Furthermore, there is also the disadvantage of the story of the stone earlier. Combining the two, everyone will think that you want to take back the palace treasury. But who does the palace treasury belong to? Who is the eldest legitimate son in the palace? Lin Wanner sighed. The things you did in Jiangnan, you truly placed yourself on the opposite side of the crown prince and even the empress dowager. Fan Xian was silent for a moment and then decided to speak his true thoughts. Correct, but in reality, I purposely created this kind of atmosphere to make the people in the palace feel that I have ulterior motives. Lin Wanner opened her mouth slightly in surprise. She felt that such a rash advance did not seem to be in his character. You came a few days late, so you don't know that the emperor has sent a eunuch to announce the edict. Fan Xian smiled slightly. In a few days, the capital will know my attitude. I am standing on the third prince's side. Lin Wanner was confused and nervous. In a quiet voice, she said, "You are prepared to let the third prince fight in the arena, but he is still a child. This child is not simple." Fan Xian lowered his head slightly and smiled gently. His ability is not bad. Furthermore, I have great confidence in my ability to read people. I also have confidence in my ability as a teacher. The person I teach will not be too bad. But, you still haven't explained why you created this kind of atmosphere today. Lin Wanner furrowed her brows. If she allowed this situation to continue, the two sides would gradually lose any chance of reconciliation. It would also force. She abruptly raised her head and looked at Fan Xian in shock. Slightly startled, she said, "You are prepared to force them to act?" The bedroom was silent for a long time. Fan Xian slowly nodded his head. In a quiet voice, he said, "Many people have overlooked the empress and the crown prince. However, they and I both know that only one side can survive between us. Taking advantage of the fact that the emperor still cares about me, I am going to force the hidden disaster to erupt earlier." Lin Wanner's expression gradually became one of helplessness. Her face darkened. Although she knew that the Son of Heaven's battle did not leave the slightest bit of affection, when she thought of her dearest husband or her brother, the crown prince, one of them had to die, she couldn't help but feel a trace of cold. Fan Xian's eyes were even colder than his wife's heart. Slowly and indifferently, he said, "I don't want to kill people. However, they have already killed people decades ago. Now, they will not let me go. Since it is so, I will finish this matter." Lin Wanner was silent for a long time. She then opened her mouth and said, "Then, what about her?" Her in these words was the biggest problem between Fan Xian and his wife, the eldest princess who had never been willing to settle down. Fan Xian's eyelids drooped slightly. Gently, he pulled Wanner into his arms. Gently, he said, "The emperor's thoughts run too deep. I won't pay attention to them. Your mother's thoughts are also too big. It is not my place to pay attention to them. This is a battle between her and the emperor. I only need to be on the side. I can't promise anything else, but I can promise you that I will not personally do anything to her." Was this promise trustworthy? Uncle Emperor has always doted on me. Lin Wanner was like a wounded kitten in Fan Xian's arms. She spoke weakly, but her eyes gradually became misty. If the eldest princess truly had the courage to do such a thing, then even if, with Fan Xian's power and identity, Lin Wanner would not be implicated in any way, her identity in the royal family would become awkward and dangerous. Fan Xian was silent. He knew that Wanner's sigh was true. After they were married and walking in the palace, only then did he clearly feel that his emperor truly doted on Wanner. Wanner's status in the palace was indeed much higher than that of a normal princess. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but sigh. The emperor marrying his favorite niece to his illegitimate son could be considered compensation to him? It's fine. It's all the elders' business, he said with a slight smile. Let them make a ruckus. Although his words were light, the content was not. In the next year, if the Qing court did not change masters, there would be a bloodbath in the royal family. What would happen to Fan Xian and Wanner, the young man and woman? If it was the former, Fan Xian believed that his entire family would be buried with the emperor. If it was the latter, how would Wanner face it? In this instant, Fan Xian suddenly felt that forcing the other party to act ahead of time seemed to be a very boring thing. However, in order to protect himself and the people around him, he had to do this. The old cripple should also be thinking this way, right? I hope he has some good ideas. Fan Xian gently patted Wanner's back and looked at the calm lake outside the window, the green mountain, the fishing boat, and the willow branch. His thoughts floated to the distant Jingdo. In the chilly royal palace in Jingdo, the serving girls and eunuchs walked quietly. Occasionally, some of the younger serving girls would giggle and immediately be harshly scolded by the old nannies. Spring had ended, and the beginning of summer had arrived. The trees in the palace were luxuriant, but the people in the palace still did not have a sliver of freedom. Guangxin Palace had once been the eldest princess's palace. After the matter of the eldest princess secretly communicating with Northern Qi and betraying a high-ranking Overwatch Council official had been exposed by Uncle Wu Zhu through the city, the most beautiful woman in Qin Kingdom had sadly withdrawn from the political scene in Jingdo and gone to the cold and cheerlessly palace. Although she could faintly influence the situation in the palace from Xinyangli Palace, it was not as convenient as being inside Jingdo. Thus, in the 6th year of the Qin calendar, she finally convinced the Empress Dowager to move back to Jingdo. At this time, the sensational incident of the Juanshan Conference had long disappeared from people's memories. However, not long after returning to Jingdo, the power of the Juanshan Conference in Jiangnan was revealed angrily in front of her brother the emperor. Thus, the emperor ordered her to once again move into the royal palace. It was called a reunion, but in reality, it was to keep a close watch. However, the eldest princess had, after all, operated in the palace for a long time. She was also the Empress Dowager's favorite girl, and her relationship with the empress had always been close. Thus, no one could stop her from entering and leaving the royal palace. The tricks she had done in secret had also successfully fooled many people. Of course, in order to reassure her brother, it was not convenient for her to leave the palace too often. She had been in close contact with her subordinates, so her most frequent activity was to chat with the Empress Dowager in the palace and study some flowers, birds, insects, and water with the empress. What she embroidered was probably not cloth. The situation in Jiangnan had already been settled. Regardless of whether or not eldest Princess Li Yunrui accepted it, whether or not she admitted it, whether or not she was sad, the Jiangnan she had managed for over a decade, had already been completely taken over by her successful son-in-law. The old Ming matriarch had died. Great Master Sanshi had died. The Ming family was as silent as a cicada in winter. Under the combined suppression of Fan Xian and Xue Qing, the Jiangnan officialdom did not have much of a backlash. The trusted aides she had placed in the 3 large workshops of the Palace Treasury Transport Company had all been pulled out by Fan Xian. Although those officials were still respectful in their letters, under Fan Xian's tyrannical power, they could not move. The anger of the people, which had been created with great difficulty, had, for some reason, quietly dissipated. Thus, the letters of blood from tens of thousands of people that had been sent to Jingdo from thousands of li away and the old scholar who had brought the case before the emperor had become rootless trees. They were not a threat to the court at all. Forfeit salary? The eldest Princess Li Yunrui narrowed her eyes. A trace of ridicule flashed through her beautiful phoenix eyes. Tell me, do you think the Fan family lacks this little bit of silver? Sitting beside her was the dignified and luxurious-looking empress. The empress smiled slightly and said, "The emperor dotes on the Fan family." A few days ago, the investigation of the Ministry of Revenue was also hastily concluded. The eldest princess smiled slightly. Her long eyelashes fluttered with a tenderness that did not match her age. She smiled lightly and said, "Minister Fan has done a great service to the country." How can we women compare? She sighed and said, when all is said and done, I don't actually have a child. Having a daughter is not that close, so why should I care about these things? I think that when autumn comes, I should ask my mother to go back to Xinyang to live. The Empress's heart thumped. She silently cursed this foxy woman for pretending to be young. She could also hear that the other party was retreating in order to advance. However, in the present situation, if Li Yunrui really did not do it, then she and the crown prince would not be able to stop Fan Xian and the third prince's momentum. Of course, the Empress was not an idiot. She knew that the eldest princess would not give up the power in her hands and leave. The other party had said these words to gain the upper hand in the situation. There was even a glimmer of caution in the Empress's smile that should not have been there. What are you saying, sister? Although I am a stupid woman who does not know the affairs of the country, I know that you are a pillar of the country and have obtained countless benefits for the Qing court. If you truly go to Xinyang, the emperor will be the first to not agree. The conversation between these two women still could not leave that chair. However, no one dared to speak too bluntly of such a matter before it started. The eldest princess was silent for a moment and slowly opened her mouth to say, "Mother is old and is always easily deceived by others." The Empress nodded and smiled slightly. Let's take it slowly. The two of them were silent and raised their teacups to sip. The Empress suddenly asked probingly, I heard. Fan Xian is doing well in Jiangnan. Is it that an ace suddenly came and cut down half a building in Suzhou? The matter of cutting down half a building with one strike could not be hidden for long. It still traveled back to Jingdou and into the palace. The eldest princess knew what the Empress wanted to ask, but she purposely did not give her the truth. With a trace of pride, she smiled and said, I do not know much about the matters of the Jianghu. If a great grandmaster stood behind the eldest princess, then the Empress would have a clearer understanding of where she should stand in their cooperation. Of course, this would also greatly strengthen the Empress and the Crown Prince's resolve. Seeing that the eldest princess was not willing to speak clearly, the Empress cursed in her heart and took her leave. Looking at the mother of the country's slightly lonely figure, a glimmer of pity and disdain flashed through the eldest princess's eyes. She wondered where this kind of character got her confidence from to want a piece of the pie. The chief strategist of Xinyang, Huang Yi, and Yuan Hongdao could not enter the palace, so the trusted aide at the eldest princess's side was a eunuch. The eunuch stood to the side and quietly said the question in the eldest princess's heart, does the Empress not know this is asking a tiger for its skin? The eldest princess said the words that it was inconvenient for a trusted aide to say. She smiled coldly and said, even if I am a tiger, she can only stand on my side. Otherwise, if the third prince truly ascends and Fan Xian wants to avenge Yi Qingmei, who will help her block it? She slowly closed her eyes and said, she and I have temporarily put aside the question of whether it is Qingqian or the second prince, because she knows that if the matter succeeds, she will not be able to win against me. She only wants a way out. The Jiangnan side? Don't worry about it anymore. The eldest princess sighed. That son-in-law of mine had already made preparations before he went to Jiangnan. How could those natives in Jiangnan be a match for him? She shook her head and faintly said after a moment of silence, now that I think about it, I really did make a big mistake back then. If it wasn't for the Nyolan Street incident, how could Fan Xian and I have become like this? If he stood by my side, who in this world could oppose us? Not waiting for the eunuch to reply, she laughed self-mockingly. What a fantasy! If Fan Xian and I did not have such an unsolvable hatred, how could my emperor brother dare to put him in such an important position? The eunuch listened to the side and didn't even dare to breathe loudly. From the beginning, I was wrong. A glimmer of coldness and decisiveness flashed through the eldest princess's beautiful face. He brushed his dragon robe, straightened his chest, and walked toward the door. The eunuch behind him quickly followed. They were only in time to hear the emperor faintly sigh, "When do you have time to go to Danzhou and have a look?" This year, the Qing kingdom was no different than any other year. The palace was still lonely and dirty. Outside the palace was still bustling. The court was still arguing. The 6 ministries were still fighting. The Overwatch Council was still silent and ferocious. Old Director Chen was still enjoying the singing and dancing in Chen Garden. Minister Fan was still busy in the Ministry of Revenue. The common people were struggling to survive. Apart from surviving, they found some happy things to comfort their almost numb hearts. For example, the East family had married a girl, the West family had lost an old man, the South had not had a flood this year, and there seemed to be a war in the West. Sir Fan Jr. had not written poems. Had the Northern Qi Saint girl and the young mistress of the Fan family met? All the way down from Jingdou to Jizhou, where it was about to merge into the Great River, there was a bustling scene on both sides of the river banks. The people repairing the river banks laboriously moved sand and stone like ants. This year, the Qing kingdom had been lucky. The spring floods were much smaller than expected. The abundance of the national treasury also gave the river transport governor's yamen a lot of confidence. Although it was heavily deducted, in the end, they still gave out a lot of wages. Thus, the motivation of the people to work was much stronger. Yang Wanli's face was dark. He wore coarse clothing and stood with his brows tightly furrowed in the bamboo shed. Although the present situation was good, the autumn floods were the most terrifying thing. Furthermore, he had the heavy responsibility of supervising the movement of the silver that was secretly shipped over. Thus, the mental pressure was incomparably great. As for repairing the dikes and dividing the water, although he did not understand these things, he still put down his pride and personally carried them out. The continuous exposure to the sun finally washed away the last trace of scholarly aura from this Fan family student, turning him into a true official. On the river banks, a number of people came from afar. It looked like they were officials heading to a foreign place. From a distance, the group of people began to call toward the inside of the bamboo shed. Yang Wanli pulled up his lapel and wiped the sweat from his face. He gazed in that direction with confusion. Finally, he saw clearly who the people were and couldn't help but walk out of the shed with joy. "Brother Jichang? Brother Jialin? Why are you here?" Yang Wanli went forward emotionally and grasped the people's hands. The people who had come were Ho Jichang and Cheng Jialin of Fan Xian's 4 disciples. After the spring examinations, these 2 had been sent out to work in other counties. Because of Fan Xian's care and their own hard work, they had advanced quickly. In just over a year, they had completed a few jumps and crossed the first big hurdle of the 7th level. However, the places where these 2 people were officials were far from Jizhou. So, while Yang Wanli was pleasantly surprised, he also couldn't help feeling a bit surprised. Ho Jichang did not have time to reply to his words. He only held those calloused hands and gazed at Yang Wanli's dark face. Moved, he said, "Sir's letter only said that you had arrived at the river transport governor's yamen. I didn't think it would be so difficult." To the side, Cheng Jialin had already begun to sigh. Yang Wanli chuckled and thought of something. With a serious expression, he said, "Usually, Wanli only talks about political matters. It was not until I came into contact with the matters of the people's lives that I realized how difficult it is for the people of the Qing kingdom." Teacher had Wanli come to repair the river because of his trust and cultivation. Only after experiencing this personally do I know that under teacher's seemingly unconcerned appearance, there is a heart that worries for the country and the people. The 3 of them fell silent. It was Ho Jichang who broke the silence and slowly said, "According to rumors, the reason you were able to subdue that Northern Qi Saint girl was all because of the words you said in the Northern Qi royal palace." Speaking of Northern Qi Saint girl Haitang, even though these 3 were all Fan Xian students, they still couldn't help but laugh up their sleeves. Yang Wanli suppressed a smile and asked, "What words?" Ho Jichang turned around and looked at the laborers on the embankment at his feet and the roaring river not far away. With a sigh, he said, "First worry about the worries of the world, then delight in the joys of the world." I was thinking, back then, we seem to have underestimated Sir. First worry about the worries of the world, then delight in the joys of the world. The three of them chewed on these words in their hearts. A sense of respect rose involuntarily. Teacher, although he looks tired, he actually has a pure heart. Yang Wanli thought of everything he had seen and heard these few months, the importance Fan Xian placed on the river transport, and the changes that had happened to Jiangnan because of Fan Xian's arrival. He couldn't help but sigh in admiration. Beside the bamboo shed on the embankment were other officials of the river transport yamen. Ho Jichang noticed that Yang Wanli kept using the word teacher and couldn't resist coughing a few times in a low voice to remind him, in front of outsiders, it's best to call him sir, otherwise the court will say we have formed a clique. A gentleman has friends but not cliques. If we really want to form a clique, I am willing to be teacher's lackey. Yang Wanli smiled slightly and said with a calmness that was different from his in the past, "Everyone under heaven knows that we are the four disciples of Fan Xian. As long as we are working for the benefit of the people under heaven, why should we care about other people's words?" Ho Jichang was slightly startled, then he laughed loudly and said, "That's true. I'm still a bit intentional. It looks like Wanli has indeed improved a lot in this half-year. Following at teacher's side is indeed beneficial for cultivating one's character." Cheng Jialin also said enviously, "We are officials outside while you are in Jiangnan. Who knew that teacher would go to Jiangnan?" Yang Wanli smiled and said, "I haven't been with teacher for many days, but that kid sure Chanli, if you go to Suzhou to see, you will know how much teacher has changed him." Speaking of this, only now did Yang Wanli remember to ask, "Where are you going?" Cheng Jialin smiled slightly and replied, "During this half-year, teacher has been reorganizing the government in Jiangnan and there have been a number of vacancies, so the Ministry of Appointments is transferring me to Suzhou." Yang Wanli nodded happily. He knew that Cheng Jialin going to Suzhou would certainly be of help to Fan Xian. "What about you?" Ho Jichang smiled and said, "I'm going to Jiaozhou to be a Dianli." Yang Wanli was startled. He thought that this kind of transfer was equivalent to being demoted. He didn't understand why Fan Xian would make such an arrangement. Ho Jichang did not explain anything. He only knew that Sir Fan Jr. had his reasons for wanting him to go to Jiaozhou. Furthermore, according to what the teacher had said in his letter, of the four of them, only he could manage to do such a sinister funeral. Worry about the world first. In the Jiangnan water village, Fan Xian lay on a bamboo chair on a large boat. Looking at the sky full of stars, he couldn't resist sighing and saying, "I came to this world to enjoy happiness, not to worry about the country and its people." On such a night, the large boat sailed along the river. It had long left Hangzhou. After spending a month by the West Lake, Fan Xian had carefully studied the medicine Fei Jie had left behind. He discovered with some annoyance that what Ku he had said was probably true. However, Fei Jie seemed to feel remorseful and didn't say a word about Fan Xian's invitation. He didn't know where that old pervert was hiding. However, Warner persisted in drinking the medicine, so his body gradually recovered. Fan Xian's mood was much better. His hatred toward Northern Qi Ku he had also decreased. As for the matter of having a child, he was not in a hurry. He wasn't even 20, so what was there to be anxious about? After all the matters in Jiangnan had been settled, he brought everyone around him onto the large boat the navy provided and began to travel along the Jiangnan waterways. Their destinations were, without a doubt, Wuzhou, Jiaozhou, and Danzhou. At this time, it was late at night. Warner, the third prince, and the others had long fallen asleep. There was only Fan Xian and Lin Debao lying side by side on the quiet plank. Even the swordsmen of the 6th Bureau and the Tiger Guards, who were usually hidden in the dark, had been called down by Fan Xian. Fan Xian couldn't sleep. De Bao had slept too much during the day on the boat, so he could endure a little. The two of them lay side by side and ate the delicious pastries of Jiangnan as they talked randomly. The world had never understood why Fan Xian had such a good relationship with that idiotic brother-in-law. In reality, even Fan Xian himself could not explain it. Perhaps it was because when talking to De Bao, he could obtain an unprecedented ease. He didn't need to think about anything and didn't need to be afraid of anything. Furthermore, he didn't need to talk about politics, the world, right and wrong, black and white, good and evil, the death of others or his own death, the white jade square, or the smelly gutter. He only needed to talk about simple and pleasant things like eating. For example, the stars that dotted the night sky above the ship. The river wind blew gently, and the water rippled without stirring. The ship was anchored in the middle of a nameless lake. The reeds around it were far away, and there were no water birds chirping at night. It was quiet. The starry sky above them was lonely and distant. Fan Xian looked at the starry sky above him and said to De Bao beside him, "What do you think the stars in the sky are?" It was sesame. De Bao gestured with his wide and plump palm. The moon is a sesame cake. The stars are sesame. Little Bao said it before. Xiao Bao was the second young master of the Lin family who had died at Uncle Wu Zhu's hands. Fan Xian's heart jumped. Shortly after, he smiled slightly and pointed at the stars and the crescent moon in the sky. "I don't know if it's Xiaobing or not. I only know that the Qin Kingdom's starry sky also has a moon and those stars. Furthermore, strangely, there is also a sun during the day." It was not strange for the sun to appear in the day and the moon and stars to appear in the night. This was common sense that even children understood. But De Bao nodded his head very seriously and said, "Little Xian Xian, I also think it's very strange." Fan Xian sighed and said, "Yes, it is too strange. When I was young, I discovered that this place is still Earth." Volume 5, End of Jiangnan in Jinghua. Note, writing the end summary tomorrow, it's really tiring. I wish everyone a happy new year, even though it's a bit late. To be continued. If you want to know what happened after, please log on to www.cmfu.com, there are more chapters. Support the author and support the original reading. Chapter 412. First of all, I want to say that I am very long-winded and do not have the ability to write prose, so please be patient and read. In any case, it is a free gift, so raise your hands in salute. It has already been 10 months since I started writing from the year of the Qing dynasty. 300 days passed in the blink of an eye. It passed so quickly that other than the extra money in my account, I didn't even feel any change. But the contents of the book were changing. The Jinghua and Jiangnan volume still stuck closely to the topic. One front and one back, the two lines intersected. Finally, the matter of Jingdou and Jiangnan was explained clearly. However, of the original 150 chapters, there were still a few more in the end. My control was indeed not perfect, but there was never anything perfect in this world, so it was not good to be so strict with myself. In the conclusion of the fourth volume, The Fog of the North Sea, I once said that the Fog of the North Sea mainly wrote about the handover. The romantic figures of the previous dynasty died, and the romantic figures of the present appeared. This volume, Jinghua and Jiangnan, was actually a process of succession. In reality, between the older generation of Xiaofan, Zhuang-Mo, and Han and the younger generation, there was still the middle generation, represented by the emperor, the eldest princess, and the 4 great grandmasters. Their strength was the strongest. If Fan Xian and Haitang wanted to take over, they had to break through this tough barrier. However, this had to be a long process. Given Fan Xian and Haitang's current strength, they could only slowly wait for an opportunity. Fortunately, that middle generation was not a piece of iron. There would be big problems between them. This was the main content of the last 2 volumes. The succession in this volume was a difficult kind of work. Destruction was always easy, and construction was always difficult. In this volume, Fan Xian fought the princes in Jingdou and subdued the Ming family in Jiangnan. Although he did not succeed completely, he still achieved his desired goal. However, this process was too troublesome. After the troublesome process, Fan Xian finally truly controlled the Overwatch Council and the palace treasury. He began to emit the aura of a bastard. A friend suggested that the 5th volume was written well, but the style was a bit too gloomy. I had to admit that there was nothing I could do about it. Brilliant political battles never existed. In a society with imperial power, one could not rely on criticism and self-criticism to resolve internal conflicts. The reason why I had such a feeling, apart from the content of this scroll, was because I wasn't very good at writing such schemes. My IQ was only at the level of the average person, so when I wrote, it was natural for me to feel gloomy and sluggish. The first half of the 5th volume wasn't too bad. The battle with the eldest princess and the second prince had already been foreshadowed in the first 4 volumes, so it was easier to write. Moreover, there were some new characters that I liked, so I was happy to write it. These people included the first prince, the shadow, the woman. By the time he went down to Jiangnan in the middle, he froze. It wasn't that he hadn't thought about it. He had thought about it a long time ago, but it was written that he was unhappy. Most importantly, Fan Xian's opponent was the Ming family, that insidious, shameless, weak, and bastard Ming family. There were no good people in the Ming family. However, in this scroll, Fan Xian could not do anything to Iron Blood, which made him very unhappy. But on second thought, didn't I write it myself? Why do I have such a problem with the Ming family? If you want to criticize, you should criticize my hands on the keyboard. So, here, I have to especially thank Fei Ligua. Yes, it was that Fei Ligua who appeared as a guest in many books. Around the 1st of December, around the time Fan Xian went down to Jiangnan to take in Xia Qifei, I once had a long chat with him on QQ for an entire day. We talked about the years in Jiangnan. Thank you to him for giving me many good ideas and giving me many good ideas. He gave me serious criticism and said that I should have some confidence in myself and not always think that I won't write well. Once I think I can't write well, I really won't write well, and such long-winded words. I really have to thank him. I want all of those ideas. I want all of those ideas too. One by one, I want all of them. My original design is filled to the brim, so even if the style is gloomy, I'm not afraid. I believe that everyone can see the effort in this scroll. Most importantly, I had recovered my confidence. Many people said I was narcissistic. The people who loved me said this on their blogs as if they were looking at a cute puppy. The people who hated me said this through gritted teeth on the forums. In reality, narcissism was just a strong reaction to lack of confidence. I always thought that I could write better, so I wasn't confident. But later, I finally understood that my writing was good enough. At least, it was worth the money everyone spent on subscriptions. That was enough. I always thought that I could write better, so I wasn't confident. But later, I finally understood that my writing was good enough. At least, it was worth the money everyone spent on subscriptions. That was enough. At the same time, I had to thank those readers on QQ who generously gave suggestions. Hua, Pillow, and especially the one with the evil smile on his face who strongly urged me to use Wang Cheng's cameo. There were also a few people whose names I had suddenly forgotten. Plum Blossom. Sarui, I won't be listed. Thanks to all the TV. The 5th volume, Beijing, Jiangnan. What I liked the most were the occasional chapters in the first half of the novel. For example, listening to the wind and rain in a small building, or an assassination in a rainy day. Although the things I wrote were very intense, they were full of spirit. Not only did I write the feeling of the picture, but I also wrote the texture. Also, the second half of the plot was interlocking, the rhythm was appropriate, and the foreshadowing could be caught. This wasn't narcissism. It was a kind of self-comparison. I had written novels for more than 6 years, but it was rare to write such solid words. This was really a kind of improvement for me. Other than the major channels, what else was important in the 5th volume? I thought it was nothing more than the women by Fan Xian's side. There was no need to mention this. I also didn't like to use the phrase, take what you want. Cece was taken, but Haitang was? I always felt that Fan Xian was taken by Haitang. Wan'er would have children, Haitang wouldn't marry anyone else, and Ruoruo would finish her studies and return to the country. This wasn't a promise I made, but I was willing to write it that way. Later, there was something more fun. Just thinking about it made it fun. That was why the next volume was called Pleasure Before the Palace. Pleasure, that should be the meaning of the word, but it actually had 3 layers of meaning. After I finished writing it, everyone would understand. It was quite fun. However, no matter how fun it was, people would still die. In this new volume, I will definitely be able to write a good scene. I hope everyone will be satisfied. I will try my best, but there are times when I'm at my limit. Perhaps some of the chapters aren't that good. Please be understanding, I will try my best. Alright, the summary of the 5th volume ends here. Now, let's talk about the past year 2007. In the past year, a few of my relatives left. It was a very difficult thing to bear. Other than that, it was tiring. I started writing the year of the celebration of the Lunar New Year in May until today. I hadn't rested, not even for a day. Although I went to Beijing to attend the award ceremony in July and didn't write for a few days, those days were also very tiring. Although I didn't write for 10 days during the New Year, it was actually more tiring than writing. I'll talk about it later. Other than typing, there was more typing every day. This kind of life is really not that smooth, so I really admire those writers who work every day for several years. I only persisted for half a year, and I can't take it anymore. When I was writing Suzaku, when I was writing crazily, I would still take a day off every week. But now, even that day has been thrown away. Why do I have to make myself so tired? There were 3 reasons. First, everyone was waiting to see. Second, I could earn money. Third, I knew that I was a lazy person. As long as I rested for a day, it would become a habit. It would be hard for me to wind myself up again. That was why I didn't dare to relax. And the reason why I can persist, other than the first 2 reasons mentioned above, is naturally because I like to write. I really like to write. When I write proudly, I will really slap the table and shout, good. Sigh, it seems that this proves that I'm narcissistic. Then let's not talk about it. In the past year, other than being sad and tired a few times, everything was good. Very good, very good. There is nothing more to say. So, thank you, everyone. Finally, I will tell the story of this trip back to my hometown. I originally wanted to write a mid-length story, but I found that I really didn't have the energy to do so, so I just casually said a few words. In the morning of the 29th, I took a bus and a boat back to the county town. In the afternoon, it was the big family reunion. There were 40 to 50 people. My cousins and nephews who haven't seen each other for a long time drank wine and congratulated each other. Some people shed tears during the dinner, very touched. On the 30th, I accompanied my aunt for the reunion, gentle and speechless. I drank more than 10 small cups of Wuxia, very happy. On my first trip back to the mountain village, I was very grateful for the government's life-saving project. They built a guardrail on the side of the mountain road. But there was no guardrail on the winding mountain road. My cousin's driving skills were not good, and she stalled on the slope, slid backwards, panicked, changed driver, succeeded. When I arrived at the mountain village, I felt a lot of emotions. In the 90s, my mother's hometown was ordered by my family to spend a summer here. I still remember the days when I was surrounded by green trees and big rocks. I took 3 little girls to climb the trees and fight. We played 6 decks of cards and performed in the dusk to see who could sing the most songs. At that time, I was 12 or 13, and it was my first time listening to Luodayo. The girls who were a few years younger than me didn't understand, so we competed in singing nursery rhymes and folk songs. That summer, the song I sang the most was, "Today is Your Birthday, My Motherland." It seemed to be this name. When I arrived at the mountain village that day, I went to the trees and rocks that I used to climb. I brought my brother-in-law and niece, who had never been here before. Unfortunately, I only found the big rocks, and the trees seemed to have been cut down. I wanted to go to the house where my third uncle used to live, because I used to live in that house, and I always thought that house was the most beautiful villa in the mountain village. Unexpectedly, I didn't take a few steps before I heard a dog barking. I suddenly remembered that in 1990, I was also welcomed by 2 big yellow dogs on both sides of the road. I trembled as I entered the house, so I was scared. Unexpectedly, it was a black dog that looked like Chen Shuping. My third uncle had moved to the county town. In the village, there were a few uncles, no, a lot of uncles. They were busy giving New Year greetings, reminiscing, and being moved. 4 days passed in a flash. During these 4 days, there was no internet, no computer, and my cousin's newly built house didn't move the TV over, so I didn't even watch TV. At night, I would stand on the balcony of the new house and stare at the lights on the opposite mountain ridge in a daze. The night in the mountain village was very dark, and the lights really looked like the stars in the sky. It was not a petty bourgeois, although it was really something. The main reason was that we went to the mountain ridge on the 2nd day of the new year. The mountain ridge was called Zhongxing Liangzi, and it was directly opposite our village. There was a river between the 2 mountains, and there was a stone dam on the river. It was very beautiful. The problem was that the mountain was very high. It looked very high from the mountainside, not to mention the climb up the mountain. But we still had to go there. It was because it was the place where my mother had fought and lived 30 years ago. After she graduated from the teacher's college, she was assigned to teach in the primary school on the mountain. She lived there with her sister and grandmother for more than 5 years. When my mother left the mountain, she was already 8 months pregnant with me. She went down the river to Yichang. I was always curious. How did my mother walk down the mountain with a big belly? My mother was now more than 60 years old. She told us clearly that she couldn't climb up the mountain anymore. As her children, we had to take her place and go to the primary school in the mountain village 30 years ago. Moreover, my sister was also very motivated. She had lived there until she was 5 years old, and her feelings for me were deeper than mine. On the 2nd day of the new year, my sister, brother-in-law, eldest cousin, second cousin, and little cousin went up the mountain. I held the bamboo stick that my niece had made. When we went down the mountain, we met my cousin and her husband. We chatted for a while before crossing the river and climbing to the other side of the mountain. I decided to give up. I was tired. I was so damn tired. My eyes began to sparkle. It showed how my typing job was harming my body, and how hard it was to climb that mountain. I didn't need to describe my feelings in detail. Anyway, my sisters and brothers had coaxed me and tricked me. We took 3 steps at a time and finally reached the top. The top of the mountain was flatter than the middle of the mountain. There were fields and houses. Of course, there were people there, and there was an elementary school. The old school from 30 years ago had been demolished, but the new school was still on the mountain. We first went to the new school and took some pictures. In a noisy classroom, we found many people playing pai gao and gambling. Then, we went to the old school and chatted with the residents next to the school. We found that the old school had been demolished and only a dam was left. My sister sighed and said that we used to play on this dam. It was foggy and cold at the top of the mountain. I couldn't describe it. When I went to the department store to buy water, I heard a name. It was something called Shui. I remembered it was my sister's playmate. I asked her and learned that she had married in Hubei. The most successful thing was that we found the home of one of my mother's good friends next to the old school. The poor auntie had moved to another place. We only saw her uncle and her son. The uncle didn't remember what had happened in the past. He only remembered his mother's and father's names. He also remembered that his father was a soldier. The auntie's son lived in the Chengdu Sports Institute. She gave us her phone number. We exchanged greetings and felt touched. Then, we went down the mountain and returned to the village. I told my mother the details and her phone number. A few days later, she contacted the auntie. We planned to have a good chat later. When we returned to the village, we met her eldest cousin's son and daughter. They were very sad. My eldest cousin was the sister I had mentioned in the article. She had passed away. Alright, let's not talk about this anymore. Life in the village was good. My niece, brothers, and sisters had fun. I saw them playing landlord and climbing the mountain happily. It was like a pilgrimage. My sister told me that if I didn't climb up, would regret it for the rest of my life. Now, I believe it because I have climbed up. In the future, I will let my niece climb there again. My mother didn't have a good time on the mountain. However, she didn't tell me the details. Fortunately, there were many uncles who could help carry things up. She only told me that on the first day she brought her sister and grandmother to the elementary school, the wind was strong and it was raining. The three women, old and young, hugged each other. Grandmother comforted my mother. Daughter, don't be afraid. We left the village on the 4th day of Chinese New Year. On the 5th day, we went to warm up the son-in-law's house. Son-in-law was someone close to us. Now that we met across the yellow earth, we didn't feel as sad as when we first heard the news. It was more of a comfort. The younger generation was living well. After kowtowing and burning joss paper, we arranged the dishes and wine along the graveyard. We sat with the son-in-law, toasting and eating as if we were going on an outing. When we went down the mountain, we saw those white banners. I didn't know if it was the name. Alright, let's not talk about this anymore. In short, I went back to my hometown and found that the new town was very beautiful. My elders were healthy, my brothers and sisters were rich, and the younger generation was well behaved. I was very happy. Oh right, one last thing. On the 5th day of Chinese New Year, after drinking, we went to sing. One of the girls who had competed with me in the village was there. She had graduated from university several years ago and was working in Haidian. The well-behaved girls were picking songs, and the eldest girl was singing. I was drinking wine. When I heard the music, I almost spat it out. I looked at her dumbly. It's been 18 years, and you're still singing folk songs? Do you want to continue challenging me? To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please visit www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author and support the original reading. Chapter 413. Dio Yutai, 10 years without going to the wild gull guess. White clouds come and go, green mountains remain, drinking to one's heart's content. Owing Yi Zhou's talent, offending Lu Ruan's drinking ban, returning Li Du's poetry debt. Sour Zhai laughs at me, I laugh at Sour Zhai. Returning in the evening, the wild apes on West Lake Mountain mourn. In 20 years, how many romantic freaks, flowers wilting and flowers blooming. Gazing at the clouds, the platform for worshipping generals. Sleeves of the stars to pacify the country, breaking the Yenhua bewitching stronghold. Sour Zhai laughs at me, I laugh at Sour Zhai. Yuan Zhang Kajio Hall, 2 poems of Sour Zhai rhymes. As a note, the weather in Wuzhou was hot. Perhaps the little wild flowers in the corners of the streets knew their days were numbered, so they used all the strength in their bodies to angrily carry out their final bloom. The yellow color contrasted with the gray city walls and appeared all the more eye-piercing. On the right side of the straight path next to the lake was a restaurant that had just been built in Wuzhou. It was the quietest and liveliest place to go. The so-called quietness and liveliness did not actually conflict. Quietness referred to the environment, while liveliness referred to the crowd. It was just past noon. The sun in the sky gave off a piercing light. The roasting hot air floated in the city and chased all the idlers into the restaurant. Behind the restaurant was a small lake that had just been opened. The wind from the lake poured in like a large fan produced by the palace treasury. However, it did not require manpower and could still bring a sense of coolness to the people in the restaurant. The green duckweed on the surface of the lake was very flourishing. It covered the surface of the water thickly, blocking out the sun and using its shadows to protect the fish in the water. Ever since Jingdo had an additional place called Baoyue Brothel, all the restaurants in the world seemed to have gone crazy overnight and learned this kind of arrangement. There was a lake behind the building and a courtyard by the lake. However, the buildings, lakes, and courtyards of Wuzhou actually all belonged to one person. For the people of Wuzhou, this person was like the quietness of the building, the duckweed on the lake, and the cool wind passing through the people. He was everywhere, protecting everything in Wuzhou. Wuzhou did not have a great shang, no great clan, no great army. There was only this person. Ever since 20 years ago, after this poor man had entered officialdom, his name had become the symbol of Wuzhou. As long as he was there, the days of the people of Wuzhou were good. Everyone had nostalgia for their hometown. Although everyone in the world thought that Sir was the most treacherous person in all of history, for Wuzhou, Sir was Wuzhou. Even in officialdom, people often abandoned the taboo name and directly called Sir Lin Wuzhou. Yes, the person we are talking about right now is the last Prime Minister of the Qing Kingdom, the former Prime Minister who now lives in retirement in Wuzhou, Lin Ruofu. Ever since Lin Ruofu had resigned and returned home, given his identity, he rarely came out to meet with the people of Wuzhou. Even the Zhizhou, who was as respectful as a grandson, and the governor, who carried out the etiquette of a disciple, did not have many opportunities to see his appearance. But his influence on Wuzhou city was still unparalleled. Putting aside influence, at least half of the businesses in Wuzhou city were surnamed Lin. Wuzhou city flourished because of his greed for the world. Thus, no matter what, the people of Wuzhou would not say a single bad word about Lin Ruofu, even those hot-blooded students. But the same could not be said for others. I will cry out for this injustice for the Ming family. In the restaurant, a man of about 30 said angrily. His brows were full of anger. No one knew what he did, but the sharpness in his words could not be hidden. Could it be that after forcing a life to die, the court will just find some salary and let it go? The influence of the Jiangnan matter was too great. It also affected the Wuzhou region of Jiangbei. In the present world, there was much discussion about the Jiangnan matter. After all, Qing Kingdom was not a sealed-off country that strictly restricted speech, and the 8th Bureau of the Overwatch Council did not have the ability to supervise all the places outside of Jingdo. Thus, when people discussed, they were very bold. Because of the old Ming matriarch's abnormal death, the reputation of the imperial envoy patrolling Jiangnan Road, Fan Xian, had taken a great hit. After a series of actions, the Ming family was already in a precarious position, further proving Fan Xian's ruthlessness. The people of this world often sympathized with the weak, so in the discussion, there was some disdain for the government. However, ever since Fan Xian had stepped onto the stage, he had been too dazzling. Even the darkness of the Overwatch Council could not take away his brilliance. Thus, not everyone was crying out for the Ming family's injustice. Those young students, who had gotten the news from somewhere, once again leaned closer to the side of the leader of the scholars, Sir Fan Jr. When all was said and done, not many people believed that Sir Fan Jr., who had a belly full of poetry, would covet the Ming family's silver. The Ming family? What injustice! A young man in his early 20s laughed mockingly and said, "He is nothing more than a bandit who colludes with pirates to kill people and steal goods. For Sir Fan Jr. to deal with them is the fortune of the court and the fortune of the people. Only an idiot like you would do such a foolish thing." The middle-aged man's anger flared. He slapped the table and said, "Where did these pirates come from? Don't try to slander me. I am from Suzhou. The old Ming matriarch is merciful, she is already dead, how could she allow a child like you to carelessly frame her?" The young man who had argued with him earlier was a scholar from Wuxia. Hearing the middle-aged man announce his background, only now did he know that he was a traveler from Suzhou. He couldn't help but laugh coldly. Waving his fan, he said, "This matter has long spread throughout the scholar community. The Ming family, do you really think they are so clean? On the other hand, Sir Fan Jr., dare I ask, do you know what kind of shameful thing Sir Fan Jr. has done?" The Suzhou merchant paused and thought about it carefully. He realized that Sir Fan had been working for the court in Jingdo these few years. If one were to say that he had done something evil, there was indeed no way of saying it. The Wuxia scholar smiled slightly and said, "Can't think of it, right? Sir Fan Jr. is a gifted talent and has maintained his integrity. He uncovered the scandal in the spring examinations and went to northern Qi to spread the might of the country. How could such a person compete with you, a stinky merchant, for profit? That Ming family, if they hadn't done too many things in secret that angered both men and gods, how could they have provoked Sir Fan Jr. to act?" These words were actually a bit of sophistry, but it also made it impossible for the Suzhou merchant to refute. He could only hatefully say, "The Ming family colluded with pirates? Even the Jiangnan people don't know, yet you Wuxia people know. Where are the pirates? How come the court hasn't caught them? If there really is a problem with the Ming family, the court should openly investigate the case. How can they use force to force people?" The two sides quarreled more and more fiercely. Their voices gradually grew louder, and their anger grew. Although the merchant had not run out of excuses, his face was already red. He stood up, rolled up his sleeves, and prepared to fight. Fortunately, someone came up to stop him from the side, so the weak scholar did not lose out. However, no one noticed that during the process of stopping the fight, a few black feet seemed to have kicked the Suzhou merchant a few times, making him cry out repeatedly. Looking at this scene, the people in the restaurant were slightly surprised, particularly the travelers passing by Wuxia. They were arguing about Sir Fan Jr.'s matter, but why did it seem like the Suzhou merchant had offended all of the people of Wuxia? After watching for a while, these travelers felt their hearts grow colder. Even the waiter had gone up to kick him. Finally, someone could watch no longer. A delicate cry came from a table in the corner, "All of you, stop." The owner of the voice was a woman. She was dressed in tight, light yellow clothing that wrapped around her curvaceous body. At her waist was a long sword. It looked like she was a Jianghu figure. Her appearance was very delicate. When the people at her table heard this shout, they all cursed inwardly, thinking that their junior sister was going to cause trouble again. They looked at the master behind the table with some fear and wanted to call the woman back, but they didn't expect that the woman would be so fast and had already walked to the center of the building. The master of the group at the table had a calm expression. He was almost middle-aged. His energy was restrained all over his body, making it difficult to see how deep he was. He only shook his head with a slight headache. It seemed that he had no way of dealing with this girl. The few people who were in the middle of fighting saw a meddlesome person and dispersed, leaving the pitiful Suzhou merchant in the middle. After all, this woman had a sword by her side. Normal commoners would not want to provoke her. "Why are you hitting him?" the woman furrowed her brows and asked with a shout. The Wuzhou people in the restaurant smiled and couldn't be bothered to pay attention to him. It was the scholar from earlier who smiled coldly and said, "Insulting an official of the court in public. Even if the officials are magnanimous, are we not allowed to hit him? Insulting an official of the court?" The young woman furrowed her brows in disgust and said, "What is so great about Fan Xian?" There was a clamor in the restaurant. Even if the Suzhou merchant had been disrespectful toward Fan Xian, hearing this woman shamelessly look down on Fan Xian, he couldn't help but be surprised. Who was Fan Xian? In this world, which young man could be more famous than him? How could this girl dare to speak like this? The Wuzhou scholar smiled coldly and said, "Sir Fan Jr. is indeed not that great. However, it is difficult to find someone more extraordinary than him in this world." The beautiful woman furrowed her brows as if she felt that bullying these people was not much of an ability. She asked, "What does this have to do with you?" The Wuzhou scholar laughed slightly and said, "You don't understand? Sir Fan Jr. is the son-in-law of Wuzhou. This person dares to say bad things about our son-in-law in a Wuzhou restaurant. Don't you think he's asking for a beating? The son-in-law of Wuzhou. Fan Xian had married Lin Ruofu's daughter. Naturally, he had established a close and exceptionally strange relationship with Wuzhou, a place he had never been to before. After Prime Minister Lin had abdicated, Wuzhou had no one to speak for in Jingdou. The people were not many and somewhat angry. However, Fan Xian, the son-in-law, was so domineering. The people of Wuzhou also felt honored. How could they allow foreign travelers to talk about Fan Xian so wantonly? The beating the Suzhou merchant received was truly an unexpected calamity. Who told him to forget Sir Fan Jr.'s relationship with Wuzhou? The beautiful woman seemed to hate hearing Fan Xian's name. The corners of her lips twitched slightly, revealing a glimmer of mockery. So what? I don't see him being presumptuous in northern Qi. So, he is just relying on his father-in-law's prestige and hiding in Wuzhou like a turtle. So, the people at this table were northern Qi people. Although the Qing kingdom and northern Qi had long restored diplomatic relations, the two countries were connected through marriage, and with the matter of Ku He taking a disciple, they were, after all, old enemies of decades. The hatred between the people of the two countries had not decreased much. At this moment, when they heard the woman reveal her identity, everyone in the building revealed expressions of alarm and fear. Even the Suzhou merchant who had been beaten felt unlucky and spat on the floor. Without saying a word of thanks to his benefactor, he turned around and went downstairs. The beautiful woman was of noble birth, and her teacher was a leading existence in the world. Since childhood, she had never received so many supercilious looks. Her mood immediately became terrible. It was at this moment that the Wuzhou scholar cursed angrily, "If Sir Fan Jr. is a turtle, then what is your northern Qi saint girl?" The restaurant immediately quieted down. It was so quiet that even the movement of the hair next to the beautiful woman's angry face could be heard. The northern Qi woman's expression became cold. A glimmer of coldness flashed through her eyes. It was as if she had been truly angered by these words. Her finger slowly pressed against the hilt of the sword at her waist. A wave of sword intent forced out and immediately froze the cool breeze in the restaurant where it was. Such a mysterious realm, how could a normal person stand against it? The Wuzhou scholar only felt his legs weaken. With a face full of shock, he was about to kneel to the ground. At the table, the teacher of the northern Qi woman, a middle-aged man with a solemn expression, shook his head in disapproval and said, "Don't hurt people. The northern Qi woman hatefully let go of the hilt of her sword, but her expression flickered. She struck out with her palm. At this moment, a gray shadow flashed and blocked in front of the Wuzhou scholar. The middle-aged man at the table furrowed his brows. The beautiful woman had struck out with her palm long ago and could not pull it back. It crashed forcefully into a hard object. She gave a muffled grunt and felt a powerful force coming from the other person's body. She was not a match at all. Her chest felt heavy and she was shaken back a number of steps. The newcomer was dressed in gray. One hand steadily blocked in front of his body. Between his thumb and index finger was a long knife. The tip of the knife was resting on the floor. He had used this knife to block the beautiful woman's faintly discernible palm. The beautiful woman looked at the strange knife in the gray-clothed man's hand and his expressionless face. She huffed coldly. She knew she was not a match for him, but she was not very afraid. Her teacher and fellow disciples were all sitting at the table behind her. In the entire Qing kingdom, as long as Yi Luyun did not come, who could do anything to her? However, she was not willing to take the loss of this palm. Gritting her teeth, she flipped her wrist and pulled out the thin sword at her waist. The sword flashed and she prepared to attack. "Come back." The middle-aged man at the table behind her spoke slowly. Although his voice was light, it had an authority that could not be resisted. The girl angrily stamped her feet and retreated to the side of the table. Unwillingly, she said, "Teacher, let me fight again. I don't believe I can't beat him." The middle-aged man smiled slightly and said, "Last year in Shangjing, even your brother, Pu Zhucheng, lost to this man. How can you be a match for him?" The girl paused and turned her head to look. She saw the ace who had appeared out of nowhere bow to her teacher. "Sir Lang Tiao, long time no see. Brother Gao, long time no see. What a coincidence today." The middle-aged man at the table was the first disciple of the Northern Qi imperial advisor Ku He, the foremost ace in the palace, and Hai Tengdwood was brother disciple, Sir Lang Tiao. The gray-clothed man who had saved the Wuzhou scholar's life earlier and held a long knife was Fan Xian's personal Tiger Guard leader. Gauda coincidence? The two sides had suddenly met in Wuzhou. It was not something that could be explained with the word coincidence. Lang Tiao gazed at Gauda and smiled slightly. "He still won't see me?" Gauda's expression did not change. He respectfully replied, "The journey has been tiring. The mistress is resting quietly. The young master does not have time." The girl watched curiously as her teacher spoke to this person. Only now did she know that her teacher knew this person. However, she had always been cultivating in the mountains and did not know what had happened in northern Qi. Thus, she had not guessed Gao Da's identity. Even this trip to Jiangnan was her own decision. She had no idea of her teacher's true plan. Lang Tiao slowly lowered his head. His two fingers gently gripped the wine cup. In a quiet voice, he said, "Please help me bring a message. This matter cannot be dragged on like this. We Northern Qi people have our own pride." After saying this, Lang Tiao rose and prepared to lead his group of disciples out of the building. At this moment, a bamboo curtain by the side of the building moved slightly. A handsome and delicate young man slowly walked out from behind the curtain. This young man's appearance was very elegant. His lips were thin and slightly pursed. There was a harmless smile on his face. However, there was a glimmer of a heart-chilling meaning in this smile. Lang Tiao stopped his leaving steps and looked meaningfully at the newcomer. This young man only nodded his head slightly in greeting before turning his face away. With a not quite there smile, he gazed at the noisy girl and said, "This is within Qing Kingdom territory. Do you think you can just leave after committing murder on the street?" Lang Tiao was slightly startled. He didn't know why someone of his status would make things difficult for his female disciple. He was about to say something when he saw the young man firmly wave his hand to stop him. Lang Tiao helplessly shook his head. The northern court relied on this young man for too many things, so he could only let him play. The northern Chi girl didn't know who he was and thought he was another pedantic scholar who only knew how to provoke people with words. She smiled coldly and said, "My name is Wei Yingning. What advice do you have for me?" Wei Yingning? The young man looked at this elegant girl. His eyes lit up. Connecting the information he had received recently as well as Lang Tiao's purpose in coming south, he immediately understood why this girl was so angry earlier. He turned to Lang Tiao and asked, "Your disciple?" Lang Tiao smiled and nodded. The young man scratched his head. "She is Wei Hua's sister?" Lang Tiao nodded again and found it funny. He prepared to see how this young man would handle this matter. No one expected that the young man only made an "oh" sound and didn't ask anything else. He turned to face the girl called Wei Yingning and said in a quiet and warm voice, "Seeing that there are no bad consequences, leave the sword behind and I'll let you off this time." Leave the sword behind? Wei Yingning was furious. Tianyi Dao placed great importance on the inheritance of one's teacher. The sword at her waist was given to her by her teacher. As the saying goes, if the sword exists, the person exists. If the sword dies, the person dies. How could she just leave it behind? She smiled coldly and said, "Who are you? How can you speak so arrogantly?" A glimmer of anger finally appeared between Lang Tiao's brows. It was as if he had not expected this young man to be so ungrateful. The young man gazed at Wei Yingning and smiled slightly. "Putting aside who I am, I know who you are. You are Wei Hua's sister, and I call your old father brother at the table. You can be considered my junior. What's wrong with me disciplining you?" He then turned to look at Lang Tiao and smiled coldly. "Is it very interesting to use such a shameless method to force me to appear?" Lang Tiao gave a bitter laugh and sat back down. The disciples in his group saw that their disciple's sister was being humiliated while their teacher, who enjoyed great prestige in northern Qi, did not care. They couldn't help but feel shocked. Wei Yingning listened to his words and did not believe it at all. Her father was Marquis Chang Ning, the brother of the northern Qi Empress Dowager. How could he call this beautiful young man, who was like a woman, brother? Her lips trembled slightly in anger. Pointing her sword forward, she shouted, "Don't speak nonsense." The young man looked at her disapprovingly. He thought to himself that such a violent and bad temper was not like Wei Hua, that little thief. Rather, it was very much like Marquis Chang Ning, that old drunkard. Putting aside his relationship with her family, just the trouble that the old northern Qi whore had caused for him was enough for him to teach her a good lesson today. He waved his hand and moved like lightning. The tip of his finger gently touched the web between Wei Yingning's thumb and index finger. Gently and skillfully, he snatched the sword away. This move was as fast as lightning. More importantly, there was no warning. The movement was very minute. What a beautiful little trick. Wei Yingning stared blankly at this scene as if she had seen a ghost. She was so frightened that she opened her mouth wide, unable to speak. The young man slowly stroked the surface of the sword and said in admiration, "It is indeed a good sword. Wei Hua, that brat, has taken all the money I gave him and put it into his own manor. Yet, he still has the nerve to steal my wife." Wei Yingning's chest tightened. She realized that she was truly stupid. It was only now that she recognized the other person's identity. Her brother was the commander of the Northern Qi Brocade Guard. He was a person feared by everyone. In this entire world, other than the emperor, probably only that person dared to speak so disdainfully. The young man gently flicked the back of the sword. Looking at her with furrowed brows, he said, "My sister is your disciple aunt. My fiancé is your aunt master. No matter how you look at it, you are my junior. Is there a problem with me teaching you a lesson?" Tianyi Dao was indeed particular about this. Wei Yingning had nothing to say. She only thought of the despicable young man in front of her taking liberties with Duo and humiliating her Wei manner. Her face flushed red with anger. "Correct, I am the son-in-law of Wuzhou," Fan Xian said with a slight smile. Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, "I know why you have come, but give up. Tell Wei Hua to also give up. More accurately, tell your Empress Dowager to give up. In a few days, in the end, you will also have to call me son-in-law." After saying this, he crumpled the sword in his hand into a ball of scrap metal and threw it back. The state of the first part of the paper is a bit bad because I wrote the summary too happily. I wrote a 5,000-word summary, it's useless now. If you want to see the summary, please look at the previous chapter. I wrote it very happily. It's free, it's free. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please go to www.cmfu.com, there are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 414. It was said that Fan Xian and his group had long left Hangzhou and had been in Wuzhou for almost half a month. However, other than reporting this matter to the emperor, it was not revealed, so the people of Wuzhou did not know of this matter. However, there were no absolute secrets in this world, particularly something like returning home to visit relatives. It was impossible to hide it from everyone. Thus, it was not difficult to imagine that the head disciple of the Northern Qi imperial advisor, the foremost ace in the palace, Sir Lang Tiao, knew of Fan Xian's whereabouts. Lang Tiao's trip to the south touched upon an unusually interesting problem. Starting from the spring of the 6th year of the Qing calendar, the Northern Qi saint girl Haitang Duo came to Jiangnan alone and met with Fan Xian. The story of these few months had long spread throughout the north and south of the Yangtze River. Under Fan Xian's purposeful arrangements and the spread of rumors, everyone believed that there was an indescribable, ambiguous, and warm relationship between the imperial envoy of the Qing court and the Northern Qi saint girl Haitang. Just like how Fan Xian and Haitang were worried about on that bed and under that large blanket, such a romantic story between a man and a woman tugged at the hearts of too many people. The Qing kingdom had yet to react, but Northern Qi could not hold it in. Haitang was Ku He's favorite disciple, the disciple aunt closest to the Northern Qi emperor, and the Northern Qi Empress Dowager's favorite junior. Such an outstanding woman, such a Tianmai being responsible for raising the spirits of the Northern Qi people and raising the morale of the entire country, was rumored to be marrying into the Qing kingdom. This reality made the Northern Qi people angry and also made the Northern Qi royal family anxious. Furthermore, those in high positions knew of Fan Xian's position in the Qing kingdom. They also knew of the dishonorable role Fan Xian had played in that matter. The Northern Qi emperor greatly admired Fan Xian. He was, at the very least, a fan of The Story of the Stone. Although the Empress Dowager was young, her personality was stubborn. She would not allow this matter to happen. On the issue of Shenzhong, Shang Shanhu, and the issue of the provost of the Brocade Guard, the young emperor of Northern Qi had successfully forced his mother to make concessions. However, on this matter of marriage and face, the Northern Qi Empress Dowager's words were still very powerful. It was impossible for the young emperor of Northern Qi to forcefully hold on. Furthermore, in that deep abyss of thought, the Northern Qi emperor did not necessarily want Haitang to marry into the Fan manor. First, it was the problem of the several million taels of silver. Second, it was the problem of the young emperor's mind. Therefore, the little emperor remained silent on this issue, and the one in charge was the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager's opinion was very simple. How could a proper saintess of a country be dragged into those filthy rumors and unable to extricate herself? How could her most beloved Duo be married to that scoundrel Fan Xian without any status? Thus, she had sent out a group of people, led by Lang Tiao, to invite Haitang back to Northern Qi. At the same time, she had arranged a seemingly well-matched marriage for Haitang. In any case, no matter what, he could not let Haitang marry Fan Xian. This was the thought of all of northern Qi. Concerning Haitang's marriage, the Empress Dowager had arranged it to the son of Marquis Ning, her own nephew, Sir Wei Hua, the head of the Brocade Guard. The two of them were close in age. Wei Hua was indeed a capable official with a high status. He was indeed a good match. However, Wei Hua was not an idiot. First, he did not want to marry a woman more powerful than him into the family. Second, he did not want to offend Fan Xian on this issue. Everyone knew that Fan Xian had inherited one of Chen Pingping's quirks. It was to absolutely shield and hold grudges. Stealing someone's wife, what kind of grudge was that? Each time Wei Hua thought of what Fan Xian had done in northern Qi, even though he was surrounded by Brocade Guard guards, his heart still felt cold. Regardless of whether or not Wei Hua wanted to marry, he did not have the courage to disobey the Empress Dowager's edict. He could only use the Brocade Guard's secret letter to send to the Overwatch Council in the south to explain the matter to Fan Xian. At the same time, he reminded Fan Xian of this matter and rushed to remove himself from it. However, the people heading south still came. There was the stubborn Lang Tiao, as well as Lang Tiao's female disciple, Wei Hua's sister, Wei Yingning. Wei Yingning liked Haitang, just like all the women in northern Qi. She had always thought that the commissioner of the Overwatch Council in the south had used some shameful trick to keep Haitang in Suzhou. When she found out that the Empress Dowager had ordered Haitang to become her sister-in-law, she was the happiest person. Thus, after coming to Qing Kingdom, she became the angriest person. Looking at it from another angle, the things Fan Xian had done and said were an intolerable humiliation to Haitang's future husband's family, the Chongningho manor. That was why Wei Yingning was so impulsive. She was impulsive, but that did not mean her teacher, Lang Tiao, would also be impulsive. Lang Tiao was Ku He's first disciple and one of the most powerful figures in the world. Of course, he knew why the Empress Dowager had sent them on a diplomatic mission to the South Kingdom. After passing Wudu, they headed south but stopped in Wuzhou. They did not go straight to Suzhou to bring Haitang back home. Whether or not Haitang returned was not only Haitang's business, it was also the business of the young man in front of him. Lang Tiao looked at Fan Xian's delicate and peerless face and couldn't resist letting out a sigh. If they went to Suzhou to bring Haitang back home, regardless of whether she was willing or not, without Fan Xian's permission, a grudge would certainly be formed. Everyone under heaven knew that Sir Fan Jr. of the South Kingdom and Northern Qi's Saint Girl Haitang were a match made in heaven. Even someone as proud as Lang Tiao did not dare to provoke Fan Xian too much on this issue. Without Fan Xian's permission, they wanted to bring Haitang back to Northern Qi. They were also afraid that they would face the pursuit of the Qing army. Thus, he had them stay in Wuzhou. He wanted to meet with Fan Xian and report this matter. However, Fan Xian clearly knew that these people were in Wuzhou, yet he continued to avoid them. This was normal. If he knew that his wife's paternal family had sent people to marry his wife to someone else, who would have the time to pay attention to it in Northern Qi? It was already good that he did not send an army to wipe them out. This was the background and prelude to the series of conflicts in the restaurant. The Northern Qi people in the restaurant heard Fan Xian's frivolous words, particularly the son-in-law and son-in-law, and couldn't help but feel angry. They thought that the Qing people were indeed shameless. Even someone as talented as Fan Xian could not be free from vulgarity. Every time he did things, he acted in a lowly manner. How could he talk about the matters between a man and a woman without the orders of his parents and the words of a matchmaker? Lang Tiao was someone who understood Fan Xian. He laughed bitterly and said, "You know this matter is impossible. Why are you so stubborn?" Fan Xian rubbed his nose as if he had smelled something unpleasant. He smiled coldly and said, "Eldest brother, I don't know what matter you're talking about." Lang Tiao was Haitang's eldest brother disciple. Because of this, Fan Xian's tone was rather respectful. However, when these words fell into Wei Yingning's ears, she couldn't help but feel irritated. She really was his niece. Lang Tiao thought for a bit and smiled. Clapping his hands, he had his disciples leave the restaurant. Fan Xian also smiled. Lifting the front of his robe, he naturally sat directly across from him. An Overwatch Council subordinate had long since brought them tea. The two of them sat across from each other at the table and faced each other without words. A moment later, Lang Tiao warmly said, "Even if you keep avoiding me, I will eventually have to go to Suzhou." Fan Xian nodded and smiled slightly. The scenery in Suzhou is not bad. Duo and I often go shopping. We both like it. Lang Tiao's gaze narrowed slightly and he changed the topic. There are many things that you can't do as you please. Fan Xian avoided the question and straightforwardly said, "Speaking of which, in my life, there is nothing I can't do if I want to do it." Lang Tiao's brows furrowed. He didn't know what to do with the scoundrel in front of him. He could guess some of Haitang's thoughts, so he increasingly felt that the mission the Empress Dowager had given him was troublesome. Fan Xian glanced at him and smiled lightly. "The Northern Qi Empress Dowager wants you to go to Suzhou, so you should go. As for whether or not you can take her away, what does that have to do with you?" Lang Tiao listened to these words and thought for a moment. Then, he smiled. There was a glimmer of profound meaning in his smile. "You're so confident because you're certain that Duo won't return with me?" Fan Xian was silent and didn't say anything. In this matter, Haitang's will held the most important position. No one could change anything. Regardless of whether it was Northern Qi or himself, they were all vainly trying to influence her choice. Lang Tiao warmly said, "Perhaps you're wrong on one point. I came to Wuzhou to see you not because I need you to help me persuade her. I just want you to know that we're preparing to take her back. This is a matter of etiquette, not asking for your approval." Fan Xian gritted his teeth slightly and said in a cold voice, "Isn't her problem also my problem?" "I'm afraid, that's not what she thinks." Lang Tiao smiled slightly and gazed at him. "I'm the eldest disciple who watched her grow up. Although you're on good terms with her now, I'm afraid I'm still a bit more aware of what she truly thinks. She is a proud person. Think about it, will she always stay in Suzhou?" Fan Xian was silent again. He knew what Lang Tiao said was correct. Duo looked like a village girl and did things gently. But, deep in her bones, she had developed a powerful confidence and pride because of her powerful abilities. It was indeed difficult to have such a woman wait for him in Suzhou. Most importantly, Fan Xian asked himself, up until now, he could not promise her anything. This was a love story, a story of a stallion. In reality, this was a story between people. It was somewhat sad and somewhat helpless. She is a person of Northern Qi. Lang Tiao stared into Fan Xian's eyes and quietly said, "This is not a concept forced on her by anyone. It is an understanding formed since her youth. When her own path conflicts with the interests of the court and the people, you should be able to guess what she will choose." Fan Xian suddenly opened his mouth and furrowed his brows. "When have you ever respected her opinion?" "That's not right," Lang Tiao straightforwardly refuted. "It's just that, you've always influenced her opinion." Fan Xian was slightly angry. He slapped the table and said, "You people are also unreasonable." Lang Tiao looked at him and didn't say anything. After a long time, he finally broke the silence and smiled coldly. "What can you give my sister disciple? I don't care what the Empress Dowager thinks or what teacher thinks. If you can marry her, I will stand on your side." His words were powerful and resonant, and no one dared to doubt his words. Fan Xian replied, "I have worked so hard to create this situation for the sake of marrying her in the future." Lang Tiao gave a not quite there smile and said, "How are you going to marry her? Divorce your current wife?" This was Wuzhou, Lin Ruofu's home. Fan Xian was Wuzhou's son-in-law, Wan Er's home. Regardless of whether it was Lin Wan Er or Haitang, they could not be someone's concubine. Regarding this problem, Fan Xian himself had no solution. A long time ago, he had once ridiculed the eldest princess and thought that her vision was limited because she had a butt. Only now did he sadly discover that he also had his own limitations. He was not as good as Yi Qingmei, not as good as his mother. He was sitting on his butt in this world, but he temporarily had no way to break through the world's resistance. Looking at Fan Xian's expression, Lang Tiao smiled faintly. "Coming to Wuzhou is just out of courtesy to let you know. After all, in the Qing kingdom, you are the closest to us. It is not good to hide these things from you. To tell you the truth, if we go to Suzhou, Duo will certainly come with us." Fan Xian was silent, thinking of Duo's nature and nature. He knew that Lang Tiao's words were correct. Duo was too smart, so she was too stupid, too merciful, and so she was too cruel to herself. "You should go to Suzhou." Fan Xian didn't know if he had thought through something or not as he spoke with a slight smile. At this moment, it was Lang Tiao who froze. Fan Xian warmly said, "I've thought it through. It's never good to be too selfish in this matter. It's also not good to have her bear the pressure of a country. If she wants to go back, then go back. It's like returning to her maternal home." Lang Tiao sensed a trace of uncertainty in his words. Fan Xian continued to smile. "So what if I go back to northern Qi? You know your junior martial sister. How could she marry Wei Hua? Your family's Empress Dowager's thinking is too simple." Lang Tiao grunted. Fan Xian closed his eyes slightly. A mocking smile rose to the corners of his lips. "Even if you asked Imperial Advisor Ku He to come out and Haitang was forced to marry, but what? But, in this world, who would dare to marry her?" Fan Xian stared into Lang Tiao's eyes and said the most arrogant thing he had said since his rebirth. Mockingly and coldly, he slowly said, "Everyone under heaven knows she is my woman. Who dares to offend me and marry her? Does Wei Hua have the guts?" There was a death-like silence in the restaurant. A gentle breeze blew in from outside the restaurant, blowing at the sweat on the two of them. Lang Tiao was silent for a moment. He sensed the intention to destroy indiscriminately in Fan Xian's words and couldn't resist laughing. "I really don't understand you. Why must you make this matter so terrifying?" Fan Xian shook his head and said, "There are many things that you see as small, but in my eyes, they are very big." Lang Tiao was silent again. After a long time, he forced a smile and said, "What a naughty joke." It was indeed a naughty joke. The two of them had not been talking about anything else. It had only involved the matter of that woman. Lang Tiao looked at Fan Xian's calm eyes and smiled lightly. "To discuss such a matter in Wuzhou, are you not afraid that Prime Minister Lin will feel uncomfortable and that the princess will not be happy?" The reason why Lang Tiao dared to use words to block him earlier was because he was relying on this point. He was certain that Fan Xian would not dare to confidently say certain things. Fan Xian was slightly startled and ignored him. He only smiled coldly and said, "We've already met today. Why aren't you going to Suzhou? Do you want me to go with you?" Lang Tiao also ignored these words. Suddenly, his mind wandered. Warmly, he asked, "There is something I want to ask. Last year in front of the stone wall in Shi Mountain, was that black-clothed man yours?" These words had come too suddenly, so Fan Xian was unable to react. However, the training he had received from a young age was very solid. Astonishment appeared on his face and he replied, "What black-clothed man?" As for the matters of Shi Mountain, Xiaofan, and the temple, Fan Xian had long come clean to Haitang. From Haitang's mouth, He knew that Imperial Advisor Ku He had long discovered the problem. However, this kind of thing could not be admitted even if he was beaten to death. He would hold on for as long as he could. Fan Xian trusted Hai Tang. She would certainly not betray him on such an important matter. As expected, Lang Tiao did not ask further. He only quietly said, "Since it is so, then we won't talk about it anymore. I'm going to Suzhou. You're in Wuzhou. I can only hope that there won't be any problems in the future." There would definitely be problems. Fan Xian was calm. In a quiet voice, he said, "There will be problems. If you dare to disregard her wishes, no matter who, even if your teacher appears, if you force her to marry, believe me, truly, please believe me." Very gentle words, but Lang Tiao's heart was slightly cold. Having already reached the upper 9th level, he had long seen that although Fan Xian had advanced unusually during this half a year, he was still not as experienced and ruthless as himself. Hearing these warm and gentle words, he still couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. "Believe you about what?" Fan Xian smiled slightly. "If you dare to force my second wife to marry, I will certainly think of a way to destroy Northern Qi." Lang Tiao was silent. Regardless of whether or not Fan Xian's threat could be carried out, given his relationship with Northern Qi, if such an important figure valiantly threw himself into the Qin Kingdom's Iron Blood faction, it would still be a loss no one could bear. "Believe me," Lang Tiao also said warmly. "I will not let my sister disciple marry someone she doesn't want to marry." Fan Xian thought for a bit and smiled. Extending his hand, he shook Lang Tiao's wide and strong hand. "This is a man's promise." A glimmer of a smile suddenly flashed through Lang Tiao's eyes. "Perhaps it's not just a man's." Fan Xian was slightly startled and ignored him. He only said, "To answer your earlier question, regarding the matter of Duo, I am only following my father-in-law's wishes. Regardless of whether or not I can marry her, at the very least, I cannot let someone else marry her." Fan Xian's father-in-law was Lin Ruofu, Lin Wan's father. Who would have thought that this old man would set down such a rule for Fan Xian? Probably no one would have thought of this. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 4:15. Lang Tiao paused. He had thought that no matter how shameless and lowly Fan Xian was in choosing Wuzhou to negotiate, he would have to consider the Lin family's face. Who would have thought that the previous prime minister of the Qin kingdom would be as shameless as his son-in-law? Furthermore, his skin was thick to such an extent. Was there still law? Was there still justice? This is a question of morality. Lang Tiao stood up and said to himself in his heart. He didn't want to say anything more about Fan Xian. He raised his hands in a salute and took his leave. The restaurant returned to its usual calm. Fan Xian let out a breath and wiped the sweat from his forehead before sitting back down at the table. He did not feel very nervous. As for the people from Northern Qi, they would not make him feel troubled. In any case, he understood Hai Tang. That woman's temper was something even he could not grasp. Even if they temporarily left Suzhou, there would always be a day when they would meet again. As the saying goes, although the Jianghu was far away, there would always be a time when saliva would flow. What truly made Fan Xian nervous and uneasy were the contents of Lang Tiao's silent curses earlier. This was, after all, Wuzhou, Prime Minister Lin's hometown. What would Wanner think if he discussed the problem of him and another woman with guests from far away? Where would Prime Minister Lin put his face? How would he explain it to his family? That was why he had been avoiding Lang Tiao. Part of the reason was because of this consideration. He had come today because Lin Ruofu had very openly and honestly had a conversation with him. It was because of this that he had enough skin and shamelessness to discuss these things with Lang Tiao. The northern Qi people took the broken sword that had been twisted into a dough and boarded the carriage heading south. As for what would happen in Suzhou, Fan Xian no longer wanted to care. He didn't have the ability to care. He could only wait for Deng Ziyu and the others to send back some news. He stood by the railing of the restaurant and looked at the figures of the people. He stared at the young lady of the Wei family who was still seething with anger. A bitter smile rose involuntarily to the corners of his lips. He couldn't convince Haitang, and Lang Tiao couldn't either. However, he wasn't sure whether or not he would appear. Duo was a noble person who was willing to control her own life. This was a very special point. Shortly after, he thought about the matter of returning to Wuzhou and couldn't help but feel a glimmer of guilt in his heart. Naturally, it was toward Wanner. No matter how he thought about it, he couldn't think of a good way to handle it. Only then did he gradually feel Zhang Wuji's pain and happiness in the past. However, he knew that he was not as hypocritical as Zhang Wuji, but he was even more shameless. He shook his head and opened the front of his robe, letting the wind outside the restaurant enter his clothes and cool his mind. Then, he followed the footsteps of the guests downstairs. Although he had not come to Wuzhou with great fanfare, after staying in the Lin family's manor for so many days, the news had long spread outside. The Wuzhou Zhizhou had long prepared generous gifts to visit, and the common people in the marketplace had guessed that the son-in-law was on vacation in Wuzhou. When Fan Xian's carriage traveled down the street, no one came to disturb him. Not a single citizen would expose this matter. The people of Wuzhou only saw the carriage and bowed slightly, silently saluting. This kind of respect, which carried a glimmer of distance but also came from the heart, made Fan Xian very happy. From this matter, he could clearly see just what kind of position and reputation his father-in-law had in Wuzhou. However, he had not thought of one thing. The Wuzhou people's respect for him was not only because of old Prime Minister Lin, but also because of Sir Fan Jr.'s own reputation. The Wuzhou people were very proud of this son-in-law. When the carriage returned to the terrifyingly large manor of the Lin Manor, Fan Xian quickly rode to the back hall. The first thing the old man, who was playing with the emerald snuff in his hand, said was, "Those who do great things need to be thick-skinned and black-hearted." Fan Xian was silent. He found a chair and sat down. In a quiet voice, he refuted, "This has nothing to do with those things." The old man playing with the snuff was Prime Minister Lin Ruofu, who had returned to his hometown to retire. In a year's time, this once second-to-none major figure in Qin Kingdom had become like a kind old man in the countryside. His hair was combed softly, and he wore a comfortable unlined garment. On his feet was a pair of half-shoes without heels. However, there was a glimmer of tiredness and boredom in Lin Ruofu's sunken eyes. Perhaps it was because he had left the scheming of the court. This kind of indifferent cultivation made his spirit not as great as it had been in the past. Lin Ruofu listened to Fan Xian's reflexive retort and couldn't resist smiling slightly in criticism. "Do you really think this is just a matter of love between young men and women?" Fan Xian was silent for a moment. He then said, "I don't think, in essence, there is much difference." Lin Ruofu's hand, which had been incessantly stroking the snuff bottle, stopped. Looking at him, he said, "Is that so? But once this matter develops, it will not be so simple. If that woman did not have the identity of Northern Qi's sage girl and did not have a connection to the Northern Qi royal family, would a matter of love between young men and women? Do you think I would allow you to have such thoughts after being married for less than 2 years? Would the emperor silently allow you?" Fan Xian understood this logic. If it was not for the fact that marrying Haitang would bring some benefits to himself and the people behind him, no one would stand on his side. Particularly from Lin Ruofu's standpoint, there was no reason for him to help his son-in-law find a mistress. "Father-in-law." Fan Xian forced a smile and said, "The one who told me to go be ruthless is you, and now the one criticizing me is you. What should I do?" Hearing these words, Lin Ruofu couldn't help but laugh. "What you said last night was very much to my liking. I don't care what your relationship with that woman is like. As long as your position in court is more stable, my Lin family will be more stable." Fan Xian nodded. With Haitang, a great aid from the outside world, his position in the Qin kingdom would also be much more stable. However, in some areas, he was indeed a cold and emotionless person. He still retained some of the ideas from his previous life. Unconsciously, he did not want his private matters to be connected to politics. Furthermore, Haitang might not be willing to marry him. Seeming to guess what Fan Xian was thinking, Lin Ruofu smiled slightly and said, "Actually, you and I both understand the development of this matter. Whether she marries into the Fan family or not is not a matter of importance. As long as she doesn't marry someone else, it's fine." Fan Xian nodded again and admitted that this old fox's thinking was the same as his. "I'll go see Wanner and Debao." He stood and bowed respectfully to his father-in-law. Lin Ruofu thought for a moment and then warmly said, "You don't have to worry about Wanner. Although she has not been by my side since she was young, she is, after all, someone who grew up in the royal palace. Naturally, she will understand the reason." Fan Xian forced a smile and was speechless. He thought that this father-in-law was ruthlessly honest. However, thinking about it, hadn't Lin Ruofu and the eldest princess had a daughter before he had his meteoric rise? Thinking about it this way, it could be said that he understood. The matters of the previous generation were indeed more of a bastard than his own. He thought for a moment and then insisted, "I'm just going to see Wanner. This is the first time she and Debao have returned to Wuzhou. The brothers and sisters-in-law in the clan have all worshipped the two of them in the sky. At this time, they should be playing in Yidong Tian." Lin Ruofu gazed at his son-in-law with a not-quite-there smile. "If you have any room matters to explain, save it for tonight." Fan Xian angrily scratched his head. "Do you know why I agreed to betroth Wanner to you?" Although Fan Xian guessed a little, he still continued to shake his slightly swollen head. Lin Ruofu slowly placed the snuff box on the table and said, "When the emperor first intended to betroth Wanner to you, it was something that happened in the second year of the first year of the Qin calendar. At the time, Chen Pingping was opposed and strongly opposed. I sensed that there was something fishy about this matter." Fan Xian thought, "What does Chen Pingping's opposition have to do with your opposition?" Lin Ruofu answered his question, "Of all the civil and military officials in the court, there are only 3 people I fear." "Which 3? "One is your father, one is the old cripple Chen, and the old master of the Qin family." Fan Xian thought about it carefully. Chen Pingping controlled the Overwatch Council. Other than the Prime Minister, he had the most power in the hands of all the officials in the court. Furthermore, the secret power he controlled was very strong. Naturally, he was something that Lin Ruofu feared back then. Although the old master of the Qin family was old and rarely went to court, he was, after all, the head of the Bureau of Military Affairs. He was the #1 figure in the military and a super-level official. His students and old friends were all over the military, so he had to receive Lin Ruofu's attention. However, the old master of the Qin family. Back then, he was only an assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue. How could Lin Ruofu regard him so highly? Lin Ruofu did not explain the question in his eyes. He continued in a quiet voice, "Of these 3, I admire Chen Pingping's foresight the most. Thus, when he strongly opposed your marriage with Chen Girl, at the time, this matter did not seem to have any obvious disadvantages. It was the same for either side. Thus, I knew that he must know some secrets that I did not grasp, so," the old man smiled slightly and said, "I also opposed." Knowing that Wanner and his brother-in-law were traveling, Fan Xian knew that the work of holding up the grape trellises could only be done at night. Hearing his father-in-law's words, he knew that they were preparing to discuss court matters. Thus, he sat up straight and listened carefully. Hearing this, he couldn't help but ask curiously, "Then, why did you agree later? I told you before, perhaps you've already forgotten." Lin Ruofu's smile couldn't help but carry a glimmer of vicissitudes. Gong'er passed away. At my knees, I only had Dabao and Chen Girl. At the time, the emperor had already revealed his intention to have me leave my post. I have been in court for many years. My reputation as a traitor was not for nothing. I don't know how many people I have offended. Because of my protection, my people have obtained great benefits in this world. After I pass away, who will protect them? Who will protect my Dabao? Lin Ruofu stared into his eyes and said, "The day you gave me the snuff bottle, I was certain that you could do all of this. Thus, I agreed to this matter." The exquisite snuff bottle made of emerald was sitting quietly on the wooden table beside Lin Ruofu. Fan Xian was silent for a moment. He then calmly and sincerely said, "Don't worry, as long as I live, I won't let Wanner be wronged or Dabao be unhappy." Lin Ruofu nodded his head with gratification. He then sighed and said, "Later, when your past came out, only then did I find out that you were Lady Ye's son. Then, what else did I have to worry about?" This slowly brought the topic in the direction Fan Xian needed, the direction that he had never been able to say aloud or ask others. "I don't have any capable people in court, other than Ren Xiaofan," Fan Xian said with a pained smile. Fan Xian smiled bitterly and said, "On the surface, it looks like I can beat the second prince into a pulp. If that day really comes in the future and I argue in court, I have no one to speak for me." Lin Ruofu clearly knew what he meant but didn't point it out. On the contrary, he smiled and said, "Lao Shu and Xiao Hu, the two most powerful scholars in the Hall of Governmental Affairs, both admire you. Are you still not satisfied?" Fan Xian shook his head and said, "Admiration cannot be eaten. When it comes to choosing sides, who can trust who?" Lin Ruofu stared into Fan Xian's eyes and asked, "You need people you can trust?" Fan Xian did not deny this point. He chuckled like a greedy little bird with its mouth open and drooling, waiting for its elders to feed it. Lin Ruofu looked at his expression and couldn't resist chuckling. He immediately restrained his smile and calmly said, "I won't give it to you." This answer surprised Fan Xian greatly. However, he knew that since Lin Ruofu had put his entire clan on his carriage, he had to give him some help. He would not let the horse run and not let the horse eat grass. Naturally, he had his reasons for answering like this. As expected, Lin Ruofu warmly said, "Are you curious? Ever since I left Jingdo, the court officials have been in chaos. Those who have thrown their lot with the second prince and Yunrui have thrown their lot with the Eastern Palace. There are still a large number of people standing obediently under the Hall of Governmental Affairs." Fan Xian furrowed his brows slightly. He had long discovered this phenomenon. The strange thing is, why is no one throwing their lot with you? Lin Ruofu gazed at him with a not quite there smile. "You have long made a name for yourself among the scholars under heaven. Adding on Zhuang Mohan's gift, although you are a bit young, it is not impossible for you to openly become the leader of the scholars. Why? Why is it that other than Xiaofan, a former colleague of Honglu Temple, who rushed to reveal his team, none of the civil officials in the court have come to throw their lot with you? In this past year, not a single civil official came to visit you. Until now, other than those 4 students of yours who are languishing in the various prefectures, you haven't developed any power at all." This was precisely Fan Xian's great confusion and headache. At the beginning, he had thought it was the emperor's art of checks and balances. Later, he found that the Qing emperor's focus on him was still on the military and did not care much about his interactions with civil officials. Thus, he had always been a bit confused. It was as if there was a hand in the unseen that had always been hindering his progress in that area. He raised his head in astonishment and stared at his father-in-law. Why? Now, Fan Xian understood the reason it was like this. It was because his father-in-law, far away in Wuzhou, was using his remaining influence to prevent his former students from getting too close to him. The tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. Lin Ruofu somewhat liked his son-in-law's cleverness and warmly said, "Furthermore, this tree of yours has already grown too tall. You are even taller than those true princes." "Correct, this matter was arranged by me. For now, I will not let you use those people that you think are useful in order to avoid attracting discussion in the palace. As for when to give them to you," the old man sighed. "At the beginning, I stood too high and had no choice but to step down. How could I bear to let Wanner's husband repeat the same mistake? When the new emperor ascends the throne, I will give those people to you." Lin Ruofu said this in the end. Fan Xian was silent, but he smelled a glimmer of inauspiciousness. Only after the new emperor ascends the throne could those people be given to him. From another perspective, when faced with the unfathomable emperor, Lin Ruofu unconsciously could not summon up any thoughts of taking risks. Lin Ruofu's secret influence on court politics still existed, so he had to avoid arousing suspicion and let the emperor believe that he was truly retiring in Wuzhou. This was a paradoxical and difficult cycle. The biggest loss was that Fan Xian had no way of obtaining those assistants. "I'm afraid it's too late." Since the two of them had already spoken openly, Fan Xian no longer avoided anything. The crown prince and the second prince's power is basically all in court. If one of them ascends the throne in the future, I don't think I will have any good days. Lin Ruofu said, "You should be more direct." "All right," Fan Xian said straightforwardly. "I will not allow the crown prince or the second prince to sit on that chair." Lin Ruofu smiled and said, "Thus, this is your problem. Without that power, the crown prince and the second prince are no longer a match for you. Why do you care about this? You have done well this past year, but the biggest problem is that you have found the wrong direction of the battle." Fan Xian was surprised. Perhaps Lin Ruofu was thinking of something from many years ago. The gaze in his eyes seemed to grow deeper and deeper. Slowly, he said, "In the current situation, you only have one enemy, and that is Yunrui." At first, Fan Xian was surprised. Shortly after, some disapproval rose in his heart. He had seen the eldest princess methods. When she played with schemes, they were as intricate as embroidery. Unfortunately, when faced with him, the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, and he also had the help of Chen Pingping and Yan Bingyun, one old and one young, the eldest princess' best weapon was not very useful against him. As for power, Xinjiang had once sent assassins to Tsang Mountain to assassinate Fan Xian. In the end, they had come up with nothing. Thus, no matter how Fan Xian thought about it, he did not feel that there was anything scary about the eldest princess. Perhaps the rumors in the world were exaggerated. Faced with Lin Ruofu's serious expression, he couldn't help but shake his head. Lin Ruofu said, "Have you forgotten about the Juanshang conference?" "Juanshang conference?" Fan Xian slowly lowered his head. "There is only one Yi Luyun. He cannot change anything. There is only one Yi Luyun." Lin Ruofu looked at Fan Xian with a strange gaze and said, "There is also only one Sigu Jian. There is also only one Yan Xiaoyi. Also only one. But, there could be countless Juanshang conferences." Fan Xian understood what he meant and looked at his father-in-law with incomparable shock. His lips were a little dry. "You are also a member of the Juanshang conference? And Sigu Jian? What is the Juanshang conference?" Lin Ruofu smiled slightly and said, "Perhaps no one can explain it clearly. Yunrui herself can't explain it clearly. What I can explain is that the Juanshang conference is only a very loose organization. It could be a small tea tasting group, or it could be the mastermind behind the scenes that took away tens of thousands of lives and destroyed countries. Fan Xian wanted to ask something but was stopped by a wave of Lin Ruofu's hand. The Juanshang Conference is only a method of communication between people who stand at a relatively high position in this world. The last Prime Minister of the Qing court slowly narrated the secrets of this world. We are not the monarchs of a country. We just happen to hold some great power or power in our hands, and there are many things that we cannot do ourselves, so we will use the Juanshang Conference as a channel to ask for help from our friends. When our friends are in trouble, we will also help. Very equal, isn't it? The Juanshang Conference is nothing more than a gathering between friends. The Juanshang Conference does not have a strict and complete organizational structure. There are no definite goals, and there are no wishes that everyone wants to achieve. Lin Ruofu finally concluded, so, in terms of pure destructive power, because the Juanshang Conference is loose, it is not powerful. At least, it is not as useful as the Overwatch Council under the old cripple. Fan Xian was a bit confused. Since it was so, why did his father-in-law want him to be wary of the eldest Princess Juanshang Conference? Lin Ruofu smiled slightly and said, in the end, Chen Pingping was pressuring Yunrui. You also seem to be pressuring, am I right? Fan Xian had to admire the other party's political sense and nodded his head. But, you and the old cripple both seem to have made a mistake, Lin Ruofu said quietly. Lin Ruofu quietly said, you always think that by forcing the eldest princess and the second prince to jump up and stand against the emperor, you can easily obtain victory in the entire battle. Is that not the case? Fan Xian furrowed his brows. The Qing kingdom was the most powerful country in the world. Although the Qing emperor had been silent for a dozen years, the history of the past had long proven that the Qing emperor's methods were not something anyone could stand against. Because you underestimated Yunrui and the Juanshang Conference, if you allow this situation to continue and she truly goes crazy, who knows what the consequences will be. Lin Ruofu said this with a smile. He was talking about the eldest princess who had been entangled with him for many years and had even given him a cute daughter. Isn't the Juanshang Conference very loose? How can it compare to the power of a powerful country? The Juanshang Conference is like a ball bouncing around in the room. Once someone wants to press it down, the power of the rebound will be concentrated, Lin Ruofu said with a glimmer of worry on his face. Lin Ruofu said with a hint of worry on his face, especially during this year, with you and the old cripple skillfully weaving, Yunrui seems to have no way out. If at this time, the Juanshang Conference suddenly discovers an abnormally powerful opponent, the loose will become tight and the hidden power will burst forth. This is the same logic as people, when you discover a long-desired goal, any kind of risk is worth taking. Fan Xian listened to these words and a glimmer of coldness rose in his heart. Although he had created and hoped for this situation, he was still shocked by his father-in-law's words. If, other than Yi Luyun, the Juanshang Conference also had connections with Dongyi and many other helpers, then their power had long surpassed the limits of the country and stood above the world. To have the right to turn the loose fellowship into a barrel of gunpowder, in the entire world, only the Qing emperor had this right. Will Sigu Jian also act? Fan Xian couldn't resist shaking his head. Lin Ruofu gazed at him with a slight smile. If Yunrui is not crazy, she would not make such an arrangement. If she is truly forced into a corner by the emperor and you, who can say for sure? The emperor's safety concerns the power of the world. If he dies, there are too many people who can benefit. The previous prime minister said seriously, other than you and me, the subjects of the Qing kingdom. If the Qing emperor died, northern Qi would be the happiest. Dongyi would also set off firecrackers, and the Qing kingdom would probably immediately face endless disasters. Lin Ruofu finally said, for such a great goal, the enemies of the Qing kingdom will all unite. Earlier you said Sigu Jian, why don't you say Ku He? Fan Xian's mouth tasted bitter. He didn't want to continue this conversation. Lin Ruofu smiled coldly and said, Juanshan Conference? Not a member of the Juanshan Conference. As long as they are willing, they can join at any time. Yunrui is the middleman to make connections. This is what she is best at. Fan Xian understood this point. The eldest princess and the Northern Qi Empress Dowager had a good personal relationship. Furthermore, they had always been in cahoots with Dongyi. He couldn't resist smiling bitterly and said, everyone comes from all over the world for a common goal, He suddenly furrowed his brows and said, if we can guess it, the emperor must also be able to guess it. Why doesn't he strike first to gain the upper hand? The room was silent for a long time before Lin Ruofu gently said, earlier we were talking about Yunrui's matter. Although she is crazy, I have, after all, known her for 20 years. Naturally, I can guess what she will do. But the emperor. Lin Ruofu couldn't resist showing a glimmer of admiration. Although he once betrayed me, I have to say that no one knows what he is thinking in his heart. Perhaps, he is waiting for that day. Perhaps he is arrogant to the point of being a moron, Fan Xian thought inexplicably. Then what should I do? Lin Ruofu asked in a quiet voice. Didn't you originally plan to be a spectator? However, if the matter reaches a certain level, whether you are willing or not, you will still have to go on stage and act. At this moment, no matter what angle you look at it from, you must stand firmly on the emperor's side. Fan Xian thought to himself that this was nonsense. Even if he wanted to stand on his mother-in-law's side, after being scared by this father-in-law, how could he have the courage to play with a madman? I'm sick, very sick. Going to sleep. If I feel these chapters are a bit rough, please forgive me. I can't hold on much longer. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author and support the original reading. Chapter 4:16. Ever since he was in Suzhou, Fan Xian had been looking forward to the trip to Wuzhou. He knew that although the old prime minister in front of him had been quiet this year as if he had disappeared from the world, that was only an attitude he purposely put on to prevent the emperor from being wary. Of course, when the false became the true became false. After putting on this attitude for a long time, this feeling would often seep into the bones. Fan Xian admired his father-in-law's courage to give up and gain. He could not stay in court for long, so he left lightly. There was no need to discuss any conditions in detail. In any case, he had left behind a tail like Fan Xian in the capital and given the emperor enough face. Naturally, the court would give the honorably retired former prime minister some face. This kind of political wisdom made Fan Xian trust his father-in-law's judgment. Although he felt a chill and a faint excitement after hearing these words, he sank into deep thought most of the time, preparing to deal with the storm that was about to arrive. The storm was difficult to calm. Although he had a hand in stirring up the waves, it seemed that Fan Xian had thought too little of the influence of this matter. He understood the eldest princess' thoughts but was unable to immediately grasp the emperor's thoughts. In the end, Fan Xian still had his own advantages. For him, the person who knew most of the secrets in this world was that old cripple. The person who knew some of the secrets was his father. The person who knew some of the secrets was his father-in-law. These three people were the three most capable subordinates of the Qing emperor in the 5 years after the new policies of the Qing calendar, the three capable officials of the Qing court. Fan Xian remembered clearly that before he came to Jingdou from Danzhou, his father and Chen Pingping were like strangers. They had basically never spoken. Prime Minister Lin and Chen Pingping were the two biggest opposites in court. Accurately speaking, it was never possible for this triangle to communicate with each other. All of this, following Fan Xian's arrival in the capital and his marriage to Wan became a posture in the pile of old papers. At that time, other than the Qing emperor, there was another lucky person like Fan Xian who could gather the resources of the three elders and share information from all three sides. For Fan Xian, the present him could see even more clearly than these three elders. However, this kind of luck, or perhaps strength, could not be placed on an official. Thus, no matter what, one person in this triangle had to step down. Prime Minister Lin Ruofu became the first sacrifice because he and the emperor were not childhood friends. Occasionally, Fan Xian would ask himself, and only then did he realize that his coming out of retirement had indeed brought great harm to the Lin clan. Of course, it was impossible for the emperor to stop here. Thus, at the end of spring, the Jingdo Court Conference investigated the Ministry of Revenue. Fan Xian woke from his thoughts and couldn't resist shaking his head. There were clearly still so many problems in the court, yet the emperor had rushed to kill the dog first. However, the prey had not been killed yet. What was going on? Where did the emperor's confidence come from? I won't ask about Jiangnan. Lin Ruofu interrupted his thoughts and slowly said, I believe in your ability. Although, on the surface, this trip to Jiangnan seems a bit overboard, presumably you have a backup plan, only, you have to return to the capital to report on your work at the end of the year. It's good to make some preparations, especially since you don't know when those people will make their move. Fan Xian thought for a bit and couldn't resist smiling. Don't worry, it'll be fine. Lin Ruofu also couldn't resist smiling. He looked with approval at the son-in-law in front of him. Looking at the steadiness and confidence that rose to the young man's face, he asked curiously, the emperor's confidence has past history to prove it. As for you, this confidence without a head or tail, where does it come from? Fan Xian thought for a bit and replied with a smile, I believe that my luck is the best in this world. Lin Ruofu was speechless and shook his head helplessly. A moment later, he said evenly, what do you think of Yuan Hongdao? Fan Xian was slightly startled. He knew that Yuan Hongdao was once a guest of the Prime Minister's manor and a good friend of Lin Ruofu's for decades. However, it seemed that after the matter of Prime Minister Lin stepping down, this person called Yuan Hongdao played a dishonorable role. Now, this person had already become the foremost strategist in Xinjiang. Without question, he had sold out his friend for glory. Fan Xian didn't understand why his father-in-law would suddenly mention this person. He furrowed his brows and thought about how his father-in-law didn't seem to think of a way to kill this person for revenge. He felt it was strange. Yuan Hongdao is a very powerful person and a very free and easy person, Lin Ruofu smiled slightly. I still don't understand why he would sell me out. Is he not one of the eldest princess people? Does Yunrui have this ability? Lin Ruofu sighed. I'm not sure either. It has already been a year since the matter happened. My hatred toward Hongdao has gradually lessened, so I still don't understand the true background of this matter. Ask him for me, Lin Ruofu said with a glimmer of coldness. Why? Fan Xian nodded his head solemnly. He thought to himself that this greeting would either be with a sword or a crossbow. Lin Ruofu looked at his expression and shook his head. In the future, if Jingdo is truly in chaos, perhaps he can help you. Fan Xian was slightly startled. He didn't understand the meaning of these words. Lin Ruofu sank into deep thought. He was also thinking about this question. Perhaps the old cripple in the garden outside Jingdo was feeling proud. Fan Xian and his group stayed in Wuzhou for a few more days. When he had some free time, he would ask his father-in-law in the study. For one, he wanted to know some of the old matters of the past. For another, he wanted to learn from him the tricks of court politics. Although he had lived 2 lives and had an innate advantage and rich life experience, in these areas, it was clear that there was an eternal traitor at his side. Naturally, he would not let it go. In the past, when he had gone to northern Qi as a diplomatic envoy, in the carriage, Fan Xian had also learned from Sir Xiaofan. This was Fan Xian's greatest strength. He could guarantee that he would meditate and train hard at 2 in the morning and would also seize every opportunity to learn life-saving skills. This kind of perseverance and determination was actually not in line with the laziness he displayed. In the conversations these days, Fan Xian had focused on studying the important points of the court, particularly the military, which he was most unfamiliar with. The Qing family and the Yi family, who had performed meritorious deeds since the founding of the country, increased his perceptual understanding. Fan Xian found it increasingly strange. For a family as loyal as the Yi family, how could they have anything to do with the eldest princess? But, this question could only be buried in the depths of his heart. As for the Jiangnan matter, although Lin Ruofu didn't want to care, he still wrote a letter to the Jiangnan governor, Xueqing. As for the contents of the letter, Fan Xian was too lazy to care. Whether or not the governor would give the former prime minister face was another matter. What was important was that his father-in-law had analyzed Xueqing's personality for him. Xueqing was a close official of the emperor. He was a person who liked to perform meritorious deeds, and his thoughts were meticulous. This judgment made Fan Xian make up his mind. For this kind of official, the greatest hope was to become a famous official. Naturally, he would not step out and do those dirty things himself. In the future, he would use thunderous methods. As long as Xueqing could stay out of it and give him a large amount of fame afterward, he would cooperate in secret. The palace treasury's smuggling was still going on. The investigation on the sea route was still going on. The exploitation and weakening of the Ming family did not stop for a day. According to the news from Suzhou, Ming Qing was playing both sides but was unable to truly maintain contact with Taiping Money House. Without any other choice, he began to increase the amount of silver transferred from Zhaoshang Money House. Very good. Fan Xian thought to himself that as long as they passed that critical point, it would be time for the Ming family to be destroyed. Outside Wuzhou were all green mountains, so they blocked most of the blazing sunlight from the south. Additionally, the mountain wind was light and quiet, slightly brushing away the summer heat. It was truly the best place to pass the summer heat. Fan Xian and his group lived comfortably in Wuzhou. When they were far away from political matters, he would follow Wanner and Debao to wander around the surrounding mountains, hunt some game, find some small streams, roast frogs, and tell Wanner stories about Linghu Guozi. There were also times when they spent the night in the mountains. At that time, the sky was filled with stars and was too beautiful to behold. The Magpie Bridge gradually closed, and the Milky Way went with the wind. Fan Xian held his wife in his arms and quietly teased her. In a loud voice, he looked at the stars at night. He didn't know whether the world would separate or unite. He only knew that the time of the cowherd and the weaver girl's year and day was coming. Far away from the troubles of the secular world, he was very happy. With great tacit understanding, the two of them did not bring up the matters of Suzhou, Jingdou, or any other place. They did not bring up Haitang, the eldest princess, or the emperor. They only occasionally talked about Ruoruo, who was currently cultivating in northern Qi, the game prepared by the Ting family in the Fan Manor outside Jingdou, and the delicious drumsticks from Dezhou. Heading west, the two of them pointed out mountains and asked about mountains. When they came across water, they went in. When they came across a deer, they took pity on it. When they came across a lone wolf, they were fierce. They walked by a stream beside a forest and lingered in the clouds by the cliff. This was a rare moment of quiet interaction after marriage. It was as if everything beside them no longer existed. There was only Fan Xian and Lin Wanner. Wrong, there was still Debao. However, Debao's loveliness was that he was often quiet. This kind of life could not continue forever. If Fan Xian wanted to keep this kind of life, he had to leave the mountains again and walk into the world of mortals. De Bao is going to follow us? Fan Xian opened his eyes and asked curiously. Isn't it to send him to father-in-law's side to keep him company? Lin Ruofu lived alone in Wuzhou. Although there were countless disciples in the clan, there were not many who truly cared for him by his side. Wanner was going to follow Fan Xian. If De Bao also went with them, who would keep the old former prime minister company? Without a child, it was like having no children. Fan Xian could understand this kind of loneliness. Father insists, Lin Wanner said quietly. Wanner said quietly. After these days of careful nursing by Fan Xian, in addition to playing in the mountains, Wanner's body had indeed recovered for a long time. There was a healthy flush on her slightly moist cheeks, and the eyelashes on her large eyes fluttered slightly. Fan Xian smiled and gazed at her. Gently holding her hand, he said, both are fine. A number of days later, the completely black group of carriages left Wuzhou and slowly headed east. Along the way, they passed a number of small cities and large mountains before coming to a fork in the road. They had already entered the territory of Dongshan Road. This fork in the road led to the two provincial cities under Dongshan Road. To the east was Danzhou. To the north was Jiaozhou. Go to Danzhou and wait for me. I'm going to Jiaozhou to take care of some things. Fan Xian stood on the carriage and said evenly to Wanner in the carriage. At most, I'll be 10 days late. Of course, Wanner knew what he was going to do in Jiaozhou. She sighed in her heart, but she knew that with the emperor's orders, Fan Xian could not refuse. She could only pile a warm smile on her face that reassured both of them. Sticking out her tongue, she said, Don't go pick up flowers and grass. Fan Xian smiled embarrassedly and bowed to the ground. Don't worry, wife. I won't go pick flowers on the side of the road anymore. De Bao, sitting by Wanner's side, had been sitting with a wooden expression the entire time. Hearing these words, he suddenly interrupted, There are flowers in the garden. Fan Xian was slightly angry. Wanner was slightly hateful. De Bao didn't know what had happened. The three of them parted for now. Turning from the fork in the road, they had traveled less than 3 li when Fan Xian crawled out of the carriage. Stretching, he asked the subordinate beside him, Are you ready? Everything is ready, Commissioner. On the side of the mountain forest in the distance, one could faintly see a group of grave and stern black riders carrying a cold murderous aura waiting there. Can't write more. Rest first. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 4:17. Seriously ill, half of my face is swollen, I have a mild fever, and I'm dizzy all day. This chapter is a transitional chapter, so of course, there will be foreshadowing. I'm just worried that I'll forget the things I buried in the future, hee. Dongshan Road was one of the Qin Kingdom's 7 roads. It leaned toward the northeast. Heading north from Shao Mountain, one would plunge into the small vassal states that Dongyi secretly influenced. Passing through those cities, one would enter the border of northern Qi. Last year, when Fan Xian went to northern Qi as a diplomatic envoy, he had taken a different route, bypassing Cangzhou and entering via the North Sea, so he had not been to Sili. Of course, he would not head north today. There was nothing in northern Qi that attracted him. Sitting on the horse and looking at the map in his hand, Fan Xian couldn't help but furrow his brows. Pointing to a corner of the map, he said, So, Jiaozhou is still below Danzhou. What is this large blank space on it? Beside him was the deputy commander of the Black Knights, surnamed Jing. Commander Jing still wore that silver mask on his face. Listening to his superior's words, he said in a low voice, To the north of Danzhou is a large stretch of high mountains and dense forests. Very few people dare to enter, so when the map was drawn, there was only a blank space. To the north of this blank space is Dongyi, which faces the bay. Dongyi? Fan Xian sighed. He thought to himself that one day he would have to go and see. It was only now that he found out that Dongyi, the largest city in the world, was not far from Danzhou, where he had spent his childhood. However, Fan Xian was familiar with the mountains to the north of Danzhou. He knew that if he wanted to find a path from those places, it was basically impossible. Moreover, the geographical environment of this area was also very special. Along the coast were cliffs and precipices that stretched for hundreds of miles. Even birds would find it dangerous. If the people of Dongyi wanted to go to the Qin kingdom, they could only go around to the west of Shao Mountain or go by sea. Thinking of Dongyi's powerful sea navigation abilities, a glimmer of worry flashed through Fan Xian's eyes. Although the navy in this world could not affect the bigger picture, it still had the ability to carry out some harassment. What if Dongyi forcefully landed in Danzhou? Only now did Fan Xian finally understand why the emperor cared so much about this matter and wanted him to personally act. He also understood why, after the Quanzhou First Navy was disbanded, the court persisted in maintaining such a navy in the remote Jiaozhou. Jiaozhou was to the south of Danzhou. A powerful navy was stationed there to intimidate Dongyi's power on the sea. A cold smile rose involuntarily to the corners of Fan Xian's lips. Now, he knew that the Quanzhou Navy, from a certain perspective, was like his mother's private army. The court's work was indeed watertight. "Old Jing, why don't you take off your mask?" He smiled at the Black Knight commander beside him, doing his best to make his tone gentler and not reveal the chill in the depths of his heart. Following Chen Pingping's strict orders, these 400 Black Knights had become Fan Xian's subordinates ever since he left for northern Qi. The 400 black-clothed, black-horned, black-faced riders had actually helped Fan Xian a lot, such as Shang Shanhu's rescue of Xiao En and the Juanshan conference in Jiangnan. However, the greatest benefit the Black Knights brought Fan Xian was not just these. Due to various reasons, Fan Xian had never been able to extend his hand into the military. The existence of the Black Knights was equivalent to his most powerful martial power. It could increase his power and also give him a bit more confidence when negotiating with others. In a situation where he had no military power, having the Black Knights under his command was a comforting thing. However, Fan Xian was not very close to this group of subordinates because the Black Knights could not enter a province or even go near a province. Fan Xian was also a person who loved to enjoy life, so he did not want to live in a military camp. Thus, there was not much time for conversation between his superiors and subordinates. This kind of unfamiliarity was impossible to get rid of in a short period of time. Fan Xian understood that if he truly wanted to do something in the future, he had to control this most powerful martial power under his command. He could not rely on Chen Pingping to control it. He could only rely on himself to have these 400 riders follow him wholeheartedly and subdue them from the depths of their hearts. Ever since he met up with the Black Knights at the crossroads, he had been trying to use the method he had used to subdue Wang Qinian and Deng Ziyu, as well as the strange deputy commander of the Black Knights who always wore a silver mask. Fan Xian smiled warmly and spoke candidly. He chatted and talked about trivial matters of the day, creating a warm and open atmosphere. Of course, he did not forget to reveal the steadiness and confidence that a person in a high position should have. However, the deputy commander Jing remained indifferent and was not moved at all. He replied straightforwardly, "I'm used to it." Thus, Fan Xian was a bit angry. He suddenly smiled slightly and said, "There are only two types of people who wear masks." Riding beside him on the horse, Commander Jing's body did not have any reaction. However, Fan Xian noticed that his hand holding the reins had tightened slightly. It looked like he was interested in this topic. He was probably curious to see how the famous Sir Fan Jr. would comment on the mask. Fan Xian said, "Either the face under the mask is too ugly, or it has been heavily injured and is unbearable to see people. Or, this face is too handsome, so handsome that it's like a girl's. Of course, I am not mocking myself with these words. The Black Knights go into battle to kill the enemy. The more savage the face, the easier it is to scare the enemy. Thus, the first reason does not exist. Fan Xian smiled and gazed at the silver mask flashing with a faint light. Looks like Commander Jing must be a rarely seen handsome man. Commander Jing paused and said a moment later, the commissioner is indeed impressive. Fan Xian chuckled. He thought that he had heard too many stories about the Prince of Lanling and Di Qing, so he could make a random guess. However, Commander Jing still did not take off his mask. It made Fan Xian very curious as to whether or not he had guessed correctly. I still don't know your name, Fan Xian said lightly. He couldn't be bothered to do this kind of political work anymore. Commander Jing's gaze became serious. He held the reins in his hand and said seriously, my surname is Jing, and my name is Wuming. Jing Wuming? How could Fan Xian not know the name of the most powerful martial commander under his command? He purposely pretended to be shocked and thought of the strange association he had when he first learned this person's name last year. If you are Jing Wuming, then wouldn't I be Shangguan Demonist's father? Hundreds of riders formed into a thin line and headed northeast in the quiet valley. Scouts had been sent out at a certain distance in all directions, so they shouldn't be able to reveal their whereabouts. Fan Xian and Commander Jing were in the middle and were slowly moving through the valley. At this moment, Fan Xian was smiling again because of the association he had made in the past. Commander Jing glanced at him curiously and then said, my surname is Jing. I don't have a name. I'm not called Wuming. A major figure of the 5th Bureau without a name? A Black Knight general without a name? Fan Xian opened his mouth slightly and couldn't resist sighing. He thought to himself, no wonder people feared the Overwatch Council like it was a demon. Under the influence of Chen Pingping, that old cripple, the entire structure of the Overwatch Council, the way the officials did things, and their backgrounds all carried a strange air. He knew this general would not lie to him and quietly said, it's better to have a name. Commander Jing was silent for a moment and then nodded. Sir, please bestow a name. Bestowing a name, for the person bestowing a name, was a very high honor. Fan Xian was shocked and didn't dare to believe his ears. Turning his head back to look at the sincerity in the general's calm gaze, he knew he was not joking. He slowly lowered his head and thought seriously for a long time before smiling slightly and saying, a single name, one Gu, with the courtesy name Jiwu. How about that? Commander Jing had once been a hero in the military. It was only because he had offended the nobility that Chen Pingping had fished him out and placed him in the Black Knights. He was someone with some knowledge. Hearing this name, he immediately understood Commissioner Fan's meaning and was very satisfied. He smiled and nodded his head. A beautiful curve rose to the corner of his lips under the silver mask. Thus, the man who had provoked his superior in the military, been sentenced to death, mysteriously disappeared, and remained nameless, using a silver mask to hide his face, finally had his own name many years after cutting off the first half of his life. He had also begun another part of his life. Jing Gu. Fan Xian smiled slightly amidst the clatter of the horse's hooves. Who exactly did you offend back then? Jing Gu didn't know if it was because he was not used to his new name or because he was shocked by the commissioner's sensitivity, but he didn't speak for a moment. After a long silence, he quietly said, the Qin family. Fan Xian sucked in a cold breath. He knew what kind of power the Qin family had in the military. Old Qin had always dominated the position of head of the Bureau of Military Affairs. Little Qin had now become the commander of the Jingdo garrison. Even when his father-in-law was in court, he had to be wary of the Qin family. So, this subordinate of his had offended the Qin family back then. Thinking of this, Fan Xian couldn't help but feel the greatest admiration and shock toward Chen Pingping. That old cripple was indeed daring enough to use an enemy of the Qin family. Furthermore, he had used him for so many years and allowed Jing Gu to reach the position of deputy commander of the Black Knights. My relationship with the Qin family is not bad, he said probingly. He thought to himself that as long as Jing Gu was willing to ask him for help, he could try to make up for the enmity of the past after he returned to the capital. Jing Gu smiled. The lips that were exposed outside the silver mask smiled happily. Thank you, sir. Jing Gu said these words sincerely. There's no need. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at him. It was as if he wanted to see what this silent and valiant subordinate was thinking. After a long time, he asked, "What exactly is the enmity between you and the Qin family?" Jing Gu was silent for a moment and then said in a heavy voice, "In the camp, I killed the eldest son of the Qin family." The eldest son of the Qin family? Qin Heng's elder brother? Fan Xian's expression did not change, but his heart grew cold. If the person Jing Gu had killed had lived until now, he would probably have long been one of the top generals in court. Such enmity, what exactly was Chen Pingping thinking? Why did he keep a ticking time bomb in the Overwatch Council? A few bird cries came from ahead. The silent Black Knights stopped in unison. It was not people, it was horses. This kind of riding skill was truly one of the best in the world. Probably only the Western Hu King's army had this ability. Dusk gradually approached. Fan Xian and Jing Gu rode forward and passed through the valley. Halfway up the mountain, they looked down at the city at the foot of the mountain. The city was not large. Inside, there were already lanterns lit like stars. This was Jiaozhou. Looking to the right, a stretch of ocean was turning from blue to pitch black in the dusky sky. Faintly, one could see a heavily guarded dock and dozens of warships, as well as eye-catching camps. That was the Jiaozhou Navy. Do as you please. Kill anyone who dares to enter the city. Fan Xian had already thrown Jing Ji's question to the back of his mind. Coldly and straightforwardly giving the order, he pulled on the reins and broke away from the main group of Black Knights. Without a single guard, he rode alone up the narrow mountain path toward Jiaozhou at the foot of the mountain. To be continued. If you want to know what happened afterwards, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 418. The Black Knights headed straight for Jiaozhou. In order to deceive people, the route they chose could not be the official road. No matter how confident Fan Xian was or how much confidence he had in the Black Knights' battle power, he could not have the extravagant hope that once chaos broke out, with just 400 riders, they would be able to forcefully suppress one of the three great navies of the Qin kingdom. Thus, he could only quietly enter the city and not shoot. Looking at the Jiaozhou city gate in the distance, Fan Xian dismounted his horse. Following the Overwatch Council methods he had learned from a young age, he found a quiet place and let the horse go. The horse was intelligent and seemed to understand its master's intentions. It did not linger and headed into the quiet valley. In a moment, it disappeared without a trace. It was not that Fan Xian was unwilling to kill the horse. The smell of blood was truly unnecessary. On the contrary, it would bring some trouble. After confirming that the horse would not reveal his whereabouts, he sat down under a tree and dug a small hole beside him. Taking off the clothes on his body, he buried them in the ground. Then, he took out the equipment on his body and did a careful inspection. He confirmed that the black dagger, the third bureau's new hidden crossbow, and the drugs and poisons that never left his body were all there. He smeared something on his face and unconsciously nodded his head. Shortly after, he sighed. Somewhat unsatisfied, he buried the emperor's sword Wang Qinian had given him into the hole. Fan Xian wondered to himself when he would be able to openly use this sword. By the time he left the large tree, the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, Sir Fan Jr., had already transformed into a normal young man. His face was still delicate and handsome. However, the space between his brows had widened slightly. The corners of his eyes had drooped slightly. He had lost some of his heroic spirit and gained a glimmer of sincerity. He was already a completely different person. Underneath the coarse cloth clothes, he was still wearing the tight-fitting black night clothes. Fortunately, the material was first-rate and breathable, so he did not feel very hot. Following the rarely traveled mountain path toward Jiaozhou, the sun had long sunk below the mountain behind him. A dusky twilight enveloped the surroundings. In the last moment before the Jiaozhou city gates closed, Fan Xian walked to the city gate and obediently handed over his travel permit. He then answered a few routine questions from the city gate soldiers and easily entered the city. The travel passes made by the Overwatch Council were not fakes, rather, they were the real thing. Naturally, no one would discover any problems. Furthermore, when Fan Xian answered the questions, although he was respectful, there was not a trace of panic. Jiaozhou was by the sea, and there were many people coming and going. The city guards had long become used to it, so they did not place much importance on it. Passing through the city gate, Fan Xian rubbed his eyes and smiled. Like a traveler who had come from afar, he used a curious gaze to examine the surrounding residences and scenery. However, he did not dare to be too leisurely. His footsteps did not slow, perfectly playing the role of an outsider busying himself with business. Jiaozhou was indeed different from other provincial cities. Although it was next to the sea, the commerce, or more accurately, the retail trade, was not developed. It was clearly the busiest main road through the city, but there were not many shops on either side. Even if there were some, they were half hidden. There were no signs, making it impossible for outsiders to see what kind of business was conducted inside. The entire city appeared solemn and calm. There was less of the smoke and fire of life, but there was more dignity. As Fan Xian walked, he paid attention to these details. He knew that this was because the Jiaozhou Navy was permanently stationed here. Jiaozhou was far from the central plain. It was truly a place where the mountains were high and the emperor was far. The navy itself had tens of thousands of soldiers. This power was truly terrifying. Compared to the enormous navy, the local power in Jiaozhou appeared insignificant. The highest official in Jiaozhou was just a Zhizhou. In front of the admiral of the navy, he still had to be well behaved. Furthermore, all of Jiaozhou's economic affairs were at the whim of the navy. The daily necessities of the navy's tens of thousands of soldiers, other than being allocated by the court, were requisitioned from nearby. Although it made the people of Jiaozhou angry, it also brought a kind of abnormal prosperity. At least they didn't have to worry about not being able to sell their food. It was because of these reasons that Jiaozhou was like an enormous navy logistics base. It was like a delicate maiden beside a large man. She could only accept it, but she could not make many complaints. With such an enormous entity as the navy at its side, Jiaozhou also carried a strong military aura. The best areas in the city had all been requisitioned by the military. The largest mansions were all lived in by the high-ranking officers of the navy. The best girls were all occupied by the navy. Although the court had a clear order that did not allow the garrisoned officers to live in neighboring provincial cities, everyone knew that this rule had long lost its use. Not only in Jiaozhou, but in all the provincial armies and even the border armies, as long as they had some power, they were not willing to live in miserable tents. Instead, they would buy houses and women in the provincial cities. The Black Knights were an exception among exceptions. Fan Xian raised his head to gaze at the brothel with red lanterns hanging high and couldn't resist smiling. In a place with so many hills, the brothel business would not be bad. However, he didn't know if the navy soldiers would renege on their debts. However, according to the news from the council, although the Jiaozhou navy was the emperor of Jiaozhou, they never ate the grass near their nest. In the past, they ate the grass on the sea to the south. Fan Xian lowered his head and walked quickly past a large manor. The manor took up a lot of space, with flying eaves and flying phoenixes. The door was painted red, and the walls were hidden among bamboo. It took up half a street and was even more arrogant than the mansions of the officials in Jingdou. Today, this large manor was like the distant brothel. It was hung with bright red lanterns and appeared to be in a festive mood. On the door was a painting of an immortal with a white beard. Looking at the appearance, it seemed that some important person was having a birthday celebration. What was at odds with this joyous atmosphere are the soldiers standing guard at the entrance of the manor. The soldiers' faces were dark, and the color of water rust could be faintly seen under their ears. Presumably, they were people who had lived on the sea for many years. These soldiers did not look sideways. Their faces were solemn as they vigilantly watched the people passing by in front of the manor. There were not many people who dared to stroll in front of the manor, so most of their mission was to check the guests. Although the guests, other than the superiors of the navy, were all officials of Jiaozhou, as well as a few wealthy merchants who could stand in public. There were even a few merchants from far away in Jiangnan. These soldiers still did not relax. They carefully checked the gift boxes to ensure that no one dared to bring a weapon in. Today was the emperor's birthday banquet, so they had to ensure that nothing went wrong. Other than the front door of the manor being heavily guarded, Fan Xian quietly circulated his zhenqi. He had long heard that there should be a number of nails hidden in the secluded areas of the manor. He walked quickly past with his head down. A strange smile rose to the corners of his lips. He clearly saw the strength of the guard stationed at the corner of the street outside the manor. At the same time, he drew a map of the surrounding terrain and deeply imprinted it in his mind. In the past, he had only walked once in that enormous royal palace and remembered all the small paths clearly, much less such a large manor. Leaving behind the liveliness and the sounds of greetings behind him, he made the blinding red of the red lantern disappear into the darkness. Fan Xian pressed his lips together. His gaze, intentionally or otherwise, glanced at a spot under the wall by the street. He saw a familiar secret mark and turned to enter, walking all the way to the end of the alley. It was a dead alley. Fan Xian raised his head to look at the wall across from the dead alley and shook his head. Pushing off with the tip of his foot, his entire body rose lightly. Placing his palm on the top of the wall, he flipped over. Silently, Fan Xian, who was disguised as a commoner, once again disappeared into Jiaozhou. Behind the wall was a small courtyard. The place was not very quiet and secluded. One could faintly hear the sounds of the street a few rooms away. Although the house had 6 rooms in the front and back, it looked a bit old. It meant that although the people living here were not common people, their days were not very good. Fan Xian stepped onto the stone steps, pushed open the door, and walked straight to the main seat. Picking up the teapot beside him, he sniffed, poured himself a cup of tea, and drank it. From the side came the sound of panicked footsteps. The owner of the footsteps walked into the room and found a young man he did not recognize sitting there. He was about to ask questions when he saw the hand gesture made by the person's fingers. He couldn't help being surprised and happy. "Teacher, you've finally come." Fan Xian smiled and put down the teacup in his hand. Gazing at Ho Jichang's thin face, he couldn't resist saying, "You've come to Jiaozhou to be an official. I thought you would be able to take care of your shriveled body. How come you've become even thinner?" After Ho Jichang met with Yang Wanli on the Jiangnan levee, he had spared no effort to rush to Jiaozhou to take up his post. The journey had been tiring. In addition, he had to secretly investigate those shocking matters for Fan Xian, so the pressure on his mind was great. He had been in Jiaozhou for almost a month, but he had not made any progress. Deeply afraid that he would hinder his teacher's important matters, he had been unable to sleep for a number of nights. Presently, his eyes were sunken in, and his cheekbones were protruding. There was nothing of the free and easy appearance of the past Jingdo rainy day scholar. He smiled bitterly and self-mockingly said, "I don't have the ability to look at the affairs of the world with a smile, teacher." Fan Xian sighed. Although Ho Jichang's thoughts were the most meticulous and his actions were the most ruthless and daring of the 4 people under his tutelage, it could be seen that a scholar was, after all, still a scholar. Logically speaking, this matter should have been handled by the Overwatch Council. However, Fan Xian had arranged for Jichang to come. One reason was to shock the Jiaozhou officials. Another reason was because he had a selfish motive. After Jiaozhou fell into chaos, there would certainly be people who would be demoted and people who would receive merit. Such a great merit would certainly allow Jichang to receive an abnormal promotion. Fan Xian was still willing to leave this kind of benefit to his student. However, it could be considered the price for him to be shocked. After you arrived in Jiaozhou, were there any abnormalities? Fan Xian asked calmly. He did not ask about the matter of the Jiaozhou Navy smuggling because he knew that it was impossible for Ho Jichang to clearly understand the dirty matters in officialdom in such a short amount of time. Ho Jichang thought about it and said, "Everyone in the world knows that I am your student, so these officials are quite courteous to me. Even the generals in the Navy are very tactful. It is just that I don't know much. I've only heard some rumors." Fan Xian nodded. This was a situation he had long guessed. He thought for a bit and then said, "Admiral Chang Kun is holding a birthday banquet today. Did he not invite you?" Ho Jichang paused and said, "I am only a minor official, but it should be to give you face. This admiral also gave me an invitation. However, you said you would arrive today, so I have been waiting at home. I haven't decided whether to go or not." "Go," Fan Xian said decisively. "You go first." For him to go first, the hidden meaning was that Fan Xian would go later. Ho Jichang furrowed his brows and said, "You are alone." "One person is enough," Fan Xian smiled slightly. "Chang Kun is not Xiaofan. He does not have the right for me to value him too much." Pausing, he then said, "Today is his birthday banquet. In the future, his family can give him birthday wishes and memorial services on this day. This will save a lot of trouble." Ho Jichang's heart jumped. He tasted bitterness in his mouth as he gazed in a daze at his teacher. He knew that Fan Xian was certainly going to kill someone at the birthday banquet. However, he didn't know how exactly his teacher was going to kill him under the protection of the valiant Jiaozhou Navy. Furthermore, a proper admiral of the Navy, a first-level official, could not just be assassinated. The emperor and teacher shouldn't make such a muddled mistake. If the birthday banquet became a battlefield, how would they deal with the aftermath? If you want to know what happens after, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.